She didn't just tear his ticket. She shredded protocol. "Back to economy, kid," Claire Weber snapped it, her voice loud enough to slice through the quiet tension of Gate 14 at Charles de Gaulle. She raised her hand and ripped the boarding pass clean in two. Sharp, public, final. The boy didn't flinch. He just stood there. 14, slim, soft jawline. Hoodie pulled over half-curly hair. Nothing about him screamed, "First class." And that, apparently, was the problem. "This is not your seat," Claire said flatly, shaking the halves of the torn ticket like it proved something. "Unaccompanied minors do not belong in the forward cabin." Her words landed like gravel on marble. A couple of heads turned. One woman, late 60s, silk scarf, pearls, gasped. A man in a business suit froze mid-sip of his espresso. The room didn't erupt, but it tilted quietly toward discomfort. And still, the boy said nothing. He didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't demand. Instead, he looked her directly in the eye and said calmly, "That wasn't just a boarding pass." Claire arched a brow. "Oh, really?" He tilted his head slightly. "It was a trigger." For a beat too long, she didn't respond. Then she scoffed. "Is that supposed to scare me?" He didn't answer. But 6 minutes later, $1.6 billion in ESG funding would begin to disappear. "Tell us where you're watching from," the narrator would later ask the audience. Because what just happened at Gate 14 is about to ripple through airports, banks, and boardrooms in ways no one saw coming. But at that moment, it was just Claire and the boy. Just humiliation and restraint. The boy looked down, picked up the two halves of his ticket with gentle fingers, smoothed them once, and slid them into his hoodie pocket like a ceremony. A man nearby muttered to his partner, "This doesn't feel right." His partner whispered, "Look at his eyes. He's not panicking. That kid's waiting." Julian DuPont didn't raise his voice, because he didn't have to. 3 gates down, a boarding agent at Gate 11 got a ping on her handheld. Unauthorized ethics flag incoming, JP01 Beta. She frowned. "What the?" Behind her, a junior staffer whispered, "Wait, that's internal air ethica code. Isn't that still in pilot?" But by then, Julian had already tapped the screen. Back in Geneva, a quiet notification chimed in a secure data room of Air Ethica Gateway. Henrietta DuPont, sitting alone in her glass office, set down her tea and leaned toward the interface. She didn't gasp, didn't blink. She simply read the line glowing across the screen. Julian Protocol Live Field Deployment Initiated. Clause 19B. Violation. Minor displacement. Public bias. CDG. Gate 14. ESG. Integration. Immediate trigger. 4 airlines at risk. Her assistant entered the room, breathless. "Ma'am, it's your grandson. He activated it." Henrietta sipped her tea. "Good," she said. "Let the system see itself." Back at Gate 14, Claire kept going, unaware that the ripples had started. "You kids think you can just dress up and waltz through business class because you booked a promo seat with a parent's points?" she said, shaking her head. "You don't belong here." Another voice, older, deeper, cut through her monologue. "He belongs right where he stood." Everyone turned. A Canadian man, 50s, with a G7 delegate badge around his neck, stepped forward. "I know that boy. He's not just here for a vacation. He's presenting at the Youth Ethics Forum in Montreal, under his own name, Julian DuPont." Claire blinked. "DuPont?" The air shifted. More passengers turned. Some started recording. "I don't care who his family is," Claire snapped. "I go by uniform protocol, not surnames." Julian didn't move, but he was already inside the system. His thumb hovered over a glowing button on his private app. Deploy Julian Protocol Override. "Are you sure?" He tapped yes. Across Europe, the ESG-linked risk dashboard for 4 airlines blinked red. Air Concorde, Sky Alta, Atlantiques, and Novair, all flagged. Permanent ethics lock initiated. 1.6B investment offboard sequence. 72 OR window in London. A boardroom of investors scrambled. In Frankfurt, a compliance team got an emergency memo. Julian protocol has gone public. Back in Paris, Claire Weber stared at the flight monitor as the screen flickered. Gate 14, first class hold. Ethics verification pending. What the hell is that? She muttered. A young flight attendant, Carlos, leaned in from the jet bridge. That means someone triggered a federal ethics audit. She blinked. That's not possible. Carlos stared at Julienne. It is, he said quietly. If that someone was him. Claire stepped back, suddenly pale. You're Henrietta DuPont's grandson? Julian didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just looked at her with that same quiet gaze and said, I warned you. It wasn't just a boarding pass. Gate 14 fell silent. Phones recorded. The crowd split like a sea. And Julienne DuPont, 14, silent, not dressed for war, walked forward alone, past the line of confused passengers and stunned staff, and re-entered the jet bridge. Seat 1A was still waiting, but the world he was about to fly over would never look the same, not after this. The cabin went still when he stepped back into it. Julian DuPont walked down the jet bridge without a word, his hoodie slightly askew from the earlier confrontation, his pace even, not hurried, not hesitant, just quiet. And that was what shook them. He didn't return looking defeated. He returned like nothing had happened, like everything had happened, and he had already processed it, filed it, and moved on. Carlos, the young flight attendant, stood just inside the first-class cabin. He stepped forward and extended an arm, gesturing to seat 1A. This way, Mr. DuPont, he said softly. Julienne gave a small nod. Thank you. A couple in row 2 exchanged glances. The man whispered, He's back? The woman murmured, How? As Julian eased into his seat and buckled the belt, the ambient hum of the cabin remained intact, but the social temperature had shifted. Passengers who had dismissed him moments ago now avoided direct eye contact. A few peeked over their newspapers. One woman simply stared at her phone. The screen still paused on the moment Claire tore the ticket. Julian opened his backpack, pulled out his tablet, slid on his headphones, not as a shield, but as a signal. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to prepare. Somewhere on the tarmac, under the belly of the Airbus A350, engineers received a ping they didn't expect. Internal alert, Flight 392, ESG risk flag. Active. Julian protocol status. Live ethics verification. In progress. One of them frowned. Julian protocol? That's not in production. His supervisor looked up from the tablet. It is now. Back in Geneva, the office of Air Ethica Gateway was no longer quiet. Henrietta DuPont stood at the head of a sleek glass table surrounded by senior analysts, systems officers, and legal counsel. Her assistant placed a printout in front of her, a real-time ESG analytics chart. 4 airlines, 4 massive funding lines, 1 blinking red header, permanent ethics lock, JP01 enforcement. Is this legal? Someone asked. The override wasn't scheduled for full deployment until Q4. Henrietta didn't look up from the chart. My grandson was deployed, she said calmly, and that schedule just changed. Inside Flight 392, Claire Weber wasn't speaking. She stood at the galley phone, whispering urgently to someone in operations. Her jaw was tight, the kind of tension that made the cords in her neck show. Her hands moved rapidly. No one could hear what she was saying, but everyone could feel the heat of it. Carlos stepped into the galley and pretended to check the coffee tray. Everything okay? Claire didn't turn. We've got a situation, he nodded. I'd say that's accurate. She hissed into the phone. I need a reset on Gate 14 logs. He flagged the airline and it's cascading. Carlos glanced at the cabin, lowered his voice. You didn't just mess with a passenger, Claire. I followed protocol. Carlos leaned slightly closer. You followed your protocol. He just followed a bigger one. 10 rows back, a woman in her late 60s refreshed her investment portfolio app. Her brows furrowed. Strange, she whispered to her husband. Look, ESG fund just flagged Air Concorde as non-compliant. That's the airline we're on. He blinked. You think it's related to that boy? She didn't answer, but she didn't look away from the screen either. Julian shifted slightly in his seat, glanced out the oval window. Outside, the service carts had frozen. A baggage handler stood still, phone pressed to ear, eyes darting toward the aircraft. The silence inside the plane wasn't ordinary. It wasn't waiting silence. It was listening silence. Julian tapped the corner of his tablet screen, opened a secured dashboard. The interface was simple. Deep navy background, white text, pulsing signals. In the upper left corner, JP-01 field override, engaged. Below that, 4 airline logos, each dimmed slightly. And next to them, a vertical ticker, ESG impacted assets, 1.4B, 1.5B, 1.6B. Active compliance status. Locked restoration protocol, none. Required action. Adopt Julian standard. He exhaled slowly. The system was working. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but it was responding. Flashback. 2 months ago, Julian had been sitting on the floor of his grandmother's home office, surrounded by hardbound copies of aviation ethics case studies. She stood over him, holding a flash drive. This protocol will never work if you just program it to react, she said. It has to feel the breach before it logs it. Julian had nodded, eyes already on the code. So we build in interpretive thresholds, tone detection, pattern bias analysis, repeat offender overlays. Henrietta smiled faintly. You may be 14, Julian, but you understand something most adults don't. Systemic failure is rarely loud. It's quiet. It's protocol followed to the point of cruelty. He didn't look up. So we teach the system to catch quiet cruelty. In row 1, Julian's eyes drifted back to the cabin. Claire was no longer in view. Carlos approached, crouched beside his seat. Can I get you anything? Water? Tea? Julian shook his head politely. No, thank you. Carlos paused. For what it's worth, she shouldn't have done that to you. Not just because of who you are, but because of what it means. Julian met his eyes. She didn't know who I was, and that's the point. Carlos smiled tightly. That's exactly the point. He stood and moved on. At that moment, 38,000 feet above the Atlantic, another Air Concorde flight, AC-117, received a strange in-cabin message. This flight is currently under ethics observation protocol. Crew are advised to adhere strictly to verified passenger assignments and conduct protocols. The captain tapped the alert twice. He'd never seen that code before. Back in Paris, a cluster of investors sat huddled in a boardroom overlooking La Défense. A woman in a red blazer pointed to a map of European aviation capital flows. What do you mean, withdrawn? The compliance officer clicked her pen anxiously. I mean pulled, as in $1.6 billion in ESG capital just started vanishing across 4 carriers. The room went silent. A young associate whispered, "One boy?" The senior partner answered flatly, "One DuPont." In the cabin of Flight 392, passengers began murmuring again. Did you hear what just happened? Multiple airlines are getting flagged. Something about a minor triggering a global ethics breach. A man leaned across the aisle toward Julian's row. Excuse me, are you really related to that DuPont? Julian offered a calm nod. Henrietta's my grandmother. The man blinked. Then what happens next? Julian looked out the window. They'll have to choose, he said. Between what? Julian didn't answer, but the answer was already pulsing across the systems. Adopt the Julian standard, or be locked out. A soft chime rang overhead. The captain's voice came through. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently on a brief hold as we complete a systems verification. We apologize for the delay and appreciate your patience. Julianne leaned back. The system had blinked, and now the industry had no choice but to see what came next. The plane took off like any other. Wheels lifted, wings steadied. Paris shrank beneath them in careful silence. But in seat 1A, Julien Dupont wasn't watching the clouds. He was watching the system bleed. 30 seconds after liftoff, 4 ESG compliance dashboards updated simultaneously. Air Concorde, Tier 3 violation confirmed, Sky Alta. ESG freeze initiated, Atlantics. Pending ethics review, Novair. Internal conflict flagged. On the back end of Air Ethica Gateway, Henrietta Dupont didn't smile. She simply nodded once and leaned back in her chair. A board member asked, "Should we warn the CEOs?" She folded her hands. "No. Let the system warn them." Inside Flight 392, the energy shifted. Julianne felt it even before the captain said a word. The flight attendants moved differently now, measured, careful, not nervous, but aware. It wasn't just Claire anymore. The whole cabin crew had heard, knew, or at least sensed it. Carlos returned with a second drink tray, this time offering fresh orange juice, only to Julianne. He took it politely, then glanced at the economy divider curtain, half drawn. 2 rows back, a businessman adjusted his tie and leaned toward his seatmate. "That's the DuPont kid, the ethics protocol. It's him." His seatmate shook her head slowly. "You're sure?" "Positive. They say it's already affected the Euro ESG indices." A third passenger chimed in from behind them. "I checked my portfolio 5 minutes ago. 3 of my aviation stocks just froze. No warning." Julianne heard them all and said nothing. 10,000 feet below, on the tarmac at Charles de Gaulle, a different storm was forming. Claire Weber was being escorted into a locked break room with 2 compliance officers. "I didn't do anything illegal," she said quickly. "I was enforcing boarding rules." "Boarding rules," Officer Baptiste replied calmly, "do not authorize public humiliation, ticket destruction, or profiling." Claire flushed. "I wasn't profiling. I didn't even know who he was." "Exactly," said the second officer. "That's the problem." On the screen in front of them, live footage showed the Julianne protocol dashboard in active cascade mode. Claire blinked. "Is that because of me?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Meanwhile, at the ESG Alliance headquarters in Amsterdam, the phones didn't stop ringing. A woman in a gray suit burst into the compliance war room holding a printout. "Air Concorde just dropped 6% in under an hour." Someone else shouted, "Novair's ESG certification was revoked mid-flight. That's a first." An analyst whispered, "All 4 flagged airlines have one thing in common: shared gate privileges at CDG." Another voice, "Flight 392. Back at 30,000 feet. Carlos paused at Julianne's seat again. "Mind if I ask something?" Julianne looked up from his tablet. "Go ahead." Carlos lowered his voice. "You knew exactly what would happen, didn't you?" Julianne considered his words. "I knew what could happen, but I also knew what needed to." Carlos exhaled. "You built that system with your grandmother?" "Yes. I tested most of it. She refined the legal mechanisms." Carlos gave a low whistle. "And now?" Julianne glanced around. "Now it's learning what happens when it's triggered by silence instead of shouting." The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've just been informed of a systems-wide ESG advisory. Please rest assured we're monitoring the situation closely, and your flight remains on schedule." Julianne looked out the window again. The world below was calm, but the real turbulence had only just begun. In New York, at the offices of Vert Edge Capital, one of the top ESG investors in North America, an emergency call came through. "Pull 320 miles south from Air Concorde immediately. No public statement yet." The fund manager muttered, "Who did this? Was it FAA?" "No," the caller said. It came from the Julienne Protocol, Internal Ethics Override. The fund manager froze. As in Henrietta's Julienne? Yes, the kid. He hung up and turned to his team. We're not dealing with a protest, we're dealing with a protocol. Back in the plane, Claire finally returned to the front cabin. Her face was different now, pale, controlled, like someone walking into court, not a flight. She stopped at Julienne's seat. I owe you an apology. Julienne looked at her quietly. Claire shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know who you were. You still don't, Julienne said. But that's okay. You'll learn. Claire blinked. I was just trying to protect a system you thought you understood, he finished. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He didn't look angry, and that terrified her more than yelling ever could have. 35 minutes into the flight, every major ESG fund across the EU began recalculating exposure. A memo was drafted at an insurance regulatory agency. If the Julienne standard is not adopted, do we lose our ESG scoring baseline? Another question followed. How did we let a teenager flip the sector upside down? Answer: because no one listened until the data did. Julien's phone buzzed. One name: Henrietta DuPont. He put his headphones on, tapped accept. Her voice came through clear, cool, soft. You okay? Yes, ma'am. Did you deploy the ethics lock? Yes. There was a pause. You did it right. Julienne leaned his head back against the seat. No, he said quietly. I did it because it was wrong. Henrietta said nothing for a moment. Then, they'll fight it. I know. They'll try to discredit you. I'm ready. They'll underestimate you. Julienne opened his eyes. They already did. Across the sky, the engines hummed. Below, institutions scrambled. And at the heart of it all, a boy barely old enough to drive sat still in seat 1A, listening not to music, but to silence. The sound of an industry finally being held accountable. Carlos watched Julienne carefully, eyes scanning the boy's unnaturally calm face. You're not scared? Julienne looked up from the heat map. Scared of what? Carlos hesitated. You just froze $1 billion airline's future, and now the whole world knows who did it. Julienne leaned back in his seat and gave a small shrug. If a system collapses from one ethical flag, maybe it wasn't that stable to begin with. Carlos stared at him, both unsettled and deeply impressed. Across the Atlantic, Gerald Klein was in full damage control mode, but he wasn't alone. The Air Concorde board had convened an emergency Zoom meeting, faces flickering in from London, Dubai, Singapore. Everyone was shouting, "We've lost ESG eligibility in 3 major funds. We can't access Tier A insurance lines now. Legal's saying even an internal override violates international disclosure standards." Klein slammed his fist on the table. "This was one kid, one seat." "No," came a cold voice from Geneva. "It was one mirror." The voice belonged to Henrietta DuPont, patched in by a silent invitation no one recalled approving. Her image appeared center screen, crisp and unshaken. "You looked into that mirror," she said, "and didn't like what you saw, so now you're trying to break it." Klein's face turned red. "Who the hell do you think you are, hijacking a board call?" Henrietta smiled faintly. "I don't need to hijack anything. You called me the moment you signed onto an ESG compliance structure built with my code." One board member tried to defuse. "Ms. DuPont, surely there's a misunderstanding." "There's none. Julienne acted within protocol boundaries. The system responded. Your problem isn't the ethics alert. It's the fact you ignored your own." Her voice dropped a tone. "And this is only the first domino." Back in Baltimore, a quiet storm was brewing. Julienne's name had just gone viral, not from a press release or media campaign, but from an anonymous Reddit thread titled, "Who is the boy that brought down an airline?" Within 2 hours, the thread had hit the front page. Screenshots of Julienne's ESG co-authorship, archive footage of him with Henrietta at a tech ethics summit in Berlin, even a grainy clip of him talking about equity in transportation at just 11 years old. Most of the public wasn't angry. They were inspired. This kid just made more change in one flight than Congress has in a year. Forget Spider-Man. I want my son to grow up like Julian DuPont. Henrietta trained a dragon in plain sight. But not everyone was cheering. One comment, buried but quietly climbing, read, "Rich kid weaponizing ethics to punish airlines? What next? AI courtrooms?" Another, "Ethics score locked us out of our Paris deal, and no one voted for this DuPont kid." A digital war was beginning, and Julienne was at the center. Henrietta knew it. That's why she began phase 2 of his preparation. She sent him a packet, encrypted of course. Inside were media predictions, psychological attacks, potential disinformation narratives. "They will try to turn you into a villain," her voice memo said. "The louder you remain silent, the louder the truth will echo." Julienne read each document carefully. There was no panic in his expression, just absorption. And then he did something Henrietta didn't expect. He sent back a message. Only 2 words. "I'm ready." Meanwhile, ESG compliance centers across 3 continents were now flagging 5 more airlines for ethics score instability. One of them, Blue North Aviation, immediately issued a defensive press release. "We are re-evaluating the operational decisions of our crew aboard Flight 88. We deeply value ethical transparency." But it was too late. The market had already shifted. The DuPont protocol had introduced a new fear: real-time accountability. And for every airline executive watching the collapse of Air Concorde, the message was clear. One teenager with a seat and a signal could burn down a fleet. Up in the air, Carlos broke the silence again. "Do you want me to get someone?" he asked Julienne. "Security? A manager? I can let them know what's going on." Julienne shook his head. "They don't need to know." Carlos looked confused. "Why not?" Julienne looked down at his lap, then up again. "Because if they do know," he said softly, "they'll try to stop it." It happened at 2:46 a.m. Eastern Time. The post wasn't flashy. No hashtags, no links. Just a plain image and 4 words. "This is the boy." It showed Julian DuPont, age 13, walking beside Henrietta DuPont at a climate ethics conference in Zurich 2 years ago. He was wearing a navy blue sweater, one hand clutching a notebook, the other holding Henrietta's gloved hand. Someone zoomed in and enhanced the badge on his chest. Julian DuPont, Keynote Junior Delegate, Geneva Ethics Foundation. Within 6 minutes, the photo had spread to X, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, and 2 Telegram channels focused on anti-ESG watchdogs. And just like that, the world knew. By 7:12 a.m., Julienne DuPont was trending worldwide. Not in a gentle, celebratory way. This was a split-screen war. On one side, admiration. On the other, backlash. Cable pundits scrambled for talking points. CNN. The 13-year-old disrupting a $7 billion industry, savior or symptom. Fox. Unaccountable elites let a kid decide airline policy. Wake up, America. NBC ran a segment featuring Julian's old robotics competition win. Then, a panel debated whether the DuPont protocol was ethical authoritarianism or the future of market accountability. Even comedy shows jumped in. Late-night hosts aired split-screen jokes between Elon Musk at 13 and Julian DuPont with a kill switch. But while the adults yelled, the kids noticed something different. TikTok exploded with Gen Z edits. Clips of Julian calmly reading data with captions like, "Real power is silent. My Roman Empire is Julian DuPont." He made grown men cry with a spreadsheet. Thousands of teens reposted his interviews and speeches, set to emotional orchestral music, calling him the youngest CEO of consequences. In Geneva, Julian sat in Henrietta's study, the room flooded with alpine light. He held his phone like it was glass. He scrolled through video after video, some praising him, some attacking. One post accused him of being groomed by globalists. Another showed a cartoon of him as a dictator. And in the middle of it all, one particular post stopped him cold. Julien DuPont doesn't even fly economy. He is economy. He chuckled. Just once. Henrietta entered silently behind him. "They've opened the gates," she said. "I know. Is it too much?" He paused, then, softly, "I thought it would feel heavier." Henrietta nodded. "It will, but you've trained for this." Julien looked at her. "Phase 3? She handed him a black envelope. Inside was a single key card and a private transponder code. Julien blinked. "Is this?" Henrietta nodded. "You're not the only one with a protocol." Meanwhile, in Paris, Skyalta Airlines Executive Board launched their counterattack. Unlike Air Concorde, they weren't going to play defense. Their CEO, an ambitious, silver-haired strategist named Beatrice Mauvier, called for urgent government support and demanded the EU Commission investigate the legality of independent ethics lock systems like DuPont Protocol. "We cannot let one family dictate market access," she told press. "This is economic terrorism masquerading as moral innovation." She proposed an emergency EU resolution to ban any automated ESG triggers without state oversight. Several airline lobbyists in Brussels latched onto it. They branded Julien a digital monarch and Henrietta a rogue gatekeeper. Some even pushed for Interpol scrutiny. But Henrietta had expected this. She already had teams inside the European Ethics Oversight Bureau. The minute Skyalta's motion landed, her team uploaded 49 pages of documented ESG breaches by Skyalta from the past 3 years, previously sealed under internal compliance, leaked, public, verifiable, and just like that, the political fire turned to smoke. Still, one thing was clear. They were coming for Julien next. That night, Julien received his first physical threat. A letter arrived at the DuPont residence in Baltimore. No return address, no signature. Just a red slash across the envelope and a single line typed inside. "Step back, or someone close to you won't." Henrietta opened it in front of Julien. Her face didn't move. Julien simply said, "I thought it'd come sooner." Henrietta placed the letter on the fireplace and lit a match. Then she turned to Julien. "Time to tighten your circle." Julien's eyes were steel. "I don't need a circle." Henrietta studied him. "You do. You just don't know it yet." Meanwhile, Beatrice Mauvier wasn't done. She launched a private campaign to discredit Julien publicly. Her team reached out to former classmates, teachers, anyone who might describe him as cold, isolated, brainwashed. They even tried to leak false documents implying Julien had manipulated ESG indexes for personal gain. But every attempt was countered, neatly, quietly. Henrietta's data forensics firm traced each attack back to its origin, and without ever filing a lawsuit, she deployed the ultimate defense: truth in silence. For every rumor launched, a new verified ESG violation from Skyalta appeared online within hours. The pattern was unmistakable. Try to smear Julien, and your own record gets mirrored back at you. Back in Baltimore, Julien sat on the rooftop, legs dangling over the edge. The night wind ruffled his hoodie. He looked down at the quiet city, lights blinking like faint memories. Carlos appeared with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "You know," he said, handing one over, "you're allowed to be a kid just once in a while." Julien smiled faintly. "I think I skipped that patch." Carlos sat beside him. "Just don't lose the parts of you that aren't code and strategy." Julien didn't answer right away. Then he asked quietly, "Do you think they'll ever stop coming?" Carlos stared at the sky. "Not if you're doing it right." Carlos left after a while, leaving Julien alone with the hum of the city and the sound of wind brushing against old bricks. He didn't go back inside immediately. He needed the silence. Julien pulled his knees close to his chest, the hoodie sleeves hiding most of his hands. He wasn't scared. Not exactly. But the weight of what was coming sat heavy in his bones. He wasn't fighting just a corporation anymore. He was confronting an entire worldview. The next morning, Henrietta entered the war room. This wasn't the room most people saw in their estate. It was beneath the house, behind a retina scan, where 8 screens lined the walls, each showing real-time dashboards of ethics compliance, airline ESG risk markers, and news sentiment analysis. 3 of Henrietta's most trusted strategists stood around the central table. The attack from Sky Alta was phase 1, Henrietta said. They will escalate next. Political proxies, whisper campaigns, possibly cyber. One strategist, Amir, a cybersecurity lead from Zurich, nodded. Their comms team has already hired Aurora Analytics, the same firm used during the Telcordia smear incident. Henrietta raised an eyebrow. Then we go live first. The team looked at her. She tapped the table, revealing a screen beneath the glass. It displayed a live countdown. 72 hours from now, she said, we release the Julian Standard. The Julian Standard had been in quiet development for 14 months. It wasn't just an ethics checklist. It was a new baseline for how companies were evaluated on real-time passenger dignity, staff conduct, and automated response systems. Unlike the older ESG markers that relied on quarterly reports and self-disclosures, the Julian Standard operated on micro-signals, AI-analyzed interactions, passenger complaints verified by blockchain timestamp, and even voice tone monitoring from customer service channels. It was intrusive, it was relentless, and it was impossible to game. Julian had helped design its backbone. Now, he was preparing to become its face. By that afternoon, rumblings had started across the ESG investment world. The Geneva Consortium, a quiet but powerful group of ethics-based fund managers, released a vague statement. We are closely monitoring the evolution of next-generation standards. No current ESG framework can remain static in the face of systemic failure. Translation: they were ready to move. Behind closed doors, several fund managers began pulling audit files on airlines with mid-tier compliance. The effect was subtle, but within hours, 4 airline stocks dipped 3 to 6%. Executives were nervous. One anonymous CEO reportedly said in a shareholder call, "We have no idea where the floor is anymore. That kid isn't just a whistleblower, he's a reset button." Inside the DuPont estate, Julien spent the evening reviewing final simulations for the Julian Standard launch. He watched dozens of stress tests. How would the system respond if a flight attendant yelled at a deaf passenger? What if a gate agent denied boarding to a non-English speaker and then lied about it in the system? How would the real-time score drop? Would the investor dashboard pick it up? It was cold, clinical. But every data point told the same story. The system was ready. Henrietta watched him from the doorway. She didn't interrupt, just stood there, arms folded, eyes unreadable. When Julien finally looked up, she walked in and sat across from him. "You understand what comes next?" Julien nodded. "Your name will be on every headline, not just for the fallout, but for the standard. You will no longer be a story. They'll turn you into a symbol." "I know. And symbols aren't treated like people." Julien met her gaze. "Then I'll stop being one, eventually." Henrietta paused. A flicker of something crossed her expression. Regret, maybe. Or pride. "Why are you still calm?" she asked softly. Julien didn't blink. "Because it's working." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., a private meeting was being held in a dim room inside the Department of Transportation. Present were executives from 3 airlines, 1 congressional aide, and a representative from the Chamber of Commerce. The topic? How to stop Julian DuPont. They couldn't publicly attack a child. They couldn't sue an ethics standard directly, yet, so they discussed alternatives. A data bias scandal, false algorithmic triggers, frame it as overreach, claim it's punishing airlines for things beyond their control. Push for a congressional hearing on unregulated ethics algorithms. Pull Henrietta in, make it about unchecked power. But even as they schemed, they knew. None of it would matter if the public didn't turn. And right now, the public was with the boy. That night, Julien stood before a mirror. He adjusted his collar, then stepped into the camera frame in Henrietta's private studio. No makeup, no script, no edits. Just a single message, recorded quietly, to go out alongside the Julien Standard launch in 48 hours. This isn't about me. It never was. It's about what kind of world you want to sit down in. A world where you're ignored, or a world where someone notices and does something. I'm not trying to punish anyone. I'm just trying to remind them they were supposed to care. He stared at the lens, then clicked stop. Henrietta watched from behind the glass. There was nothing more to teach him now. It dropped at exactly 0800 callers UTC. A quiet press release, no dramatic press conference. Just a link, a PDF, and a name. The Julien Standard, Ethics Compliance Framework, V1.0. Within minutes, every major ESG investor, airline executive, regulatory advisor, and ethics compliance officer across Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia had the document in their inbox. It was only 36 pages, but it hit like a thunderclap. The standard introduced 6 core metrics, each with a live feed tracking component. Passenger Dignity Score, PDS, a real-time sentiment index based on verified incident reports and AI-evaluated tone analysis. Service Equity Index, SEI, tracks disparity in treatment based on race, disability, age, and language using video/audio inputs. Red Flag Escalation Ratio monitors how long it takes staff to escalate ethical complaints internally. Crew Immunity Index measures historical cover-ups and internal complaint suppression across regions. Post-Incident Transparency Window evaluates how long it takes a carrier to inform passengers of ethical violations. Proportionality Protocol ensures that staff punishment, when warranted, is aligned with passenger impact and recorded publicly. What made it revolutionary wasn't just the clarity. It was that 3 major investment firms had already signed it. Any airline not meeting baseline compliance by the following fiscal quarter would be automatically dropped from ESG-aligned portfolios. The response? Instant chaos. By noon, more than 94 airlines had downloaded the standard. 18 issued internal emergency memos. 7 scheduled closed-door board meetings within 24 hours. 2 airlines, EastJet and Aeromeridian, preemptively suspended senior compliance officers to prepare for a full ethics audit. But the others, they panicked. And in that panic came the fury. In an undisclosed boardroom in New York, the CEOs of 4 major airline conglomerates held a private crisis call. The mood was unhinged. We can't let them hijack the entire ethics ecosystem. Do you realize what this means for litigation? Any angry passenger can cite this in court. One exec slammed his fist on the table. This isn't just an ethics system. This is a weapon, a political one. It's targeting us, not helping us. Another CEO leaned forward. What if we blacklist it, refuse recognition, push FAA and EASA to declare it non-standard? A legal advisor chimed in, hesitant. It's privately owned, but the transparency and decentralization makes it difficult to discredit. The algorithm source code is verified, open source, and being mirrored on 11 legal compliant nodes. So we silenced the nodes. What, with subpoenas? No, one CEO said slowly. With influence. At 4:03 p.m., the first direct threat landed. A letter addressed to Henrietta from the Atlantic Council for Aviation Equity, ACAE, an international lobbying body for the airline industry. The letter read, "We express grave concern over the unauthorized dissemination and enforcement of a self-styled compliance standard lacking global regulatory review. We demand an immediate halt to all related activities, including investor coordination or face formal proceedings with the EU Ethics Commission." Henrietta read the letter in silence. Julien sat beside her, expression unreadable. "They sound scared," he said finally. "They are," Henrietta replied. But scared people still throw punches. She folded the letter and dropped it into the fire. Julienne raised an eyebrow. That's it? No, she said, standing. That's just the start. By evening, Henrietta convened her own meeting, not with executives or lawyers, but with former diplomats and ethics negotiators. The tone was surgical. These airlines will weaponize politics. They'll call you a symbol of elitist overreach. They'll paint you as unaccountable, unelected, and radical. Julienne nodded. Because I am unelected. Yes, Henrietta said, but not radical. She tapped the table. So we prepare a defense, not in courtrooms, not in press, but in institutions. We go to the Ethics Treaty Council. Julian tilted his head. The council hasn't updated aviation charters in 12 years. Henrietta smiled. They will now. Elsewhere, on the darker corners of the internet, the pushback turned personal. Right-wing forums spun the standard as digital tyranny, comparing Julian to Orwellian figures. One post read, "First it's airlines, then hospitals, then schools. The globalist bloodline strikes again." Another circulated an edited image of Julianne as a puppet, with Henrietta behind the strings. But even in these attacks, something was changing. For every hate post, there were 10 defenses. One teacher in Atlanta uploaded a clip. "I've taught ethics for 18 years. No adult in our system has created something this clean, this enforceable. If a kid can raise the bar, maybe we've been crawling under it too long." That clip alone got 4.2 million views. By midnight, 29 airlines had joined a private counter-consortium. Their plan? Issue a global industry rebuttal, a formal declaration refusing recognition of the Julian Standard. A line in the sand, one CEO said. But what they didn't realize, Julian was already 10 steps ahead. At dawn, Julian sent one email. It went to the Geneva ESG Index, one of the 3 global pillars for airline ethics ratings. The subject line? Request for integration. Attached was the Julian Standard API package, a plug-and-play system that could align with Geneva's current scoring model in under 36 hours. By 10:14 a.m., Geneva ESG had approved the integration. That meant one thing. Every ethics score for every major airline would now contain Julian Standard weightings as an optional but visible factor. The first domino had fallen, and the others would follow. Julian didn't celebrate. Not when Geneva ESG confirmed the integration. Not when 5 aviation blogs broke the story. Not even when a Harvard ethics professor tweeted, "This is the single most important development in transportation accountability since the 2001 FAA overhaul." Instead, he just stared at the email on his screen, then slowly turned it off. He knew what came next. 3 hours later, the retaliation began. A major airline alliance, Sky Axis Group, consisting of 6 global carriers, issued a joint legal challenge to Geneva's inclusion of the Julian Standard. Their statement accused Julian of unilaterally redefining compliance metrics without public oversight, causing destabilizing effects to shareholder confidence, and worst of all, introducing unethical surveillance-grade tools under the guise of transparency. Julian's hands clenched the edge of the table when he read that last line. He wanted to scream, "We didn't spy on anyone. You ignored your passengers so long, now you're afraid someone finally listened." But he said nothing, just looked at Henrietta. Her face was already calm. "This is good," she said. He blinked. "They're suing." "They're reacting," she corrected, "which means they're behind." Still, the mood in Geneva was shifting. Julian received a secure call from Councillor Arnaud Vellier, a senior ethics advisor on the ESG Index board. "I believe in what you've done," Vellier said. "But I need to tell you, political pressure is mounting. We've had 6 calls from member state representatives and 2 from aerospace trade ministers." "Are they threatening to pull funding?" Julian asked. "No, worse. They want to review the security implications of your system. They're implying this is foreign interference. Julien fell silent. Is that a warning? Valier paused. It's a signal. If you want to survive this, you'll need allies beyond the screen. That night, Julien met with Henrietta on the garden balcony. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the marble railing, and far below, the lights of Geneva flickered quietly. Henrietta poured 2 cups of warm tea. She never spoke first. Julien did. They're going to call me dangerous. Yes. They're going to say I'm destabilizing institutions. They're already saying it. He looked up. Then we go bigger. Henrietta's eyes didn't move. Define bigger. Let's make it public. All of it. Not just the standard. The roadmap. The simulation data. The pilot airline results. Let's make it impossible for them to say we're hiding anything. Henrietta studied him for a moment. And when they dig into your life, your family, try to smear you as spoiled or manipulated. Julien smiled faintly. They already think that. Then he added, I'd rather be attacked for being loud than ignored for being quiet. The next morning, Julien went live. It wasn't flashy, just a live stream on a verified public channel with the title, Ask Me Anything, the truth behind the standard. Within 20 minutes, over 300,000 people tuned in. Some were ethics scholars. Others were pilots, flight attendants, victims of mistreatment. And many were just teenagers, like Julien, watching someone their age hold his ground in a war no one trained him for. He answered every question. No script. He explained the tech. He admitted its limitations. He outlined future versions, encouraged independent audits, and even invited critics to join the oversight board. It was messy, honest, brave, and it worked. By sunset, 4 more investor platforms added the Julien standard to their optional compliance list. An unexpected coalition of disabled traveler advocacy groups, unionized flight attendants, and global ethics students issued a joint endorsement titled, When Institutions Fail, It's Children Who Lead. Julien read it, barely blinking. He didn't need the applause. He just needed time. Back at the estate, Henrietta walked into the study, holding a fresh dossier. Julien didn't look up. What now? She placed the file gently beside him. They're forming a coalition, not against the standard, but against you personally. A lobby group. Citizens for Institutional Integrity, funded by airlines, disguised through third-party nonprofits. Julien exhaled. Then we go one step further. Henrietta tilted her head. Go on. We bring in the data, public-facing, interactive dashboards. Let people see what their airline's ethics score looks like. Let them choose with their ticket who they trust to fly with. Henrietta paused, then smiled. You just declared open war. Julien looked at her with quiet resolve. No, he said. They did when they told a kid to give up his seat like he didn't matter. I'm just giving him the mic back. The silence came first. It started with a pause, a delayed reply, a canceled appearance. Then the silence turned into absence, and absence became suspicion. Julien noticed it during a live ethics panel on international aviation broadcast out of London. 6 CEOs were expected. Only 5 appeared. The one missing? Dario Velez, CEO of Aeroméridien, a man known for his iron loyalty to Sky Axis Group. The same man who once publicly declared that a 13-year-old cannot teach an industry to fly ethically. But today, Dario was gone. And in the quiet shadow of that absence, things began to shift. 2 days later, Henrietta received an encrypted message. No subject line, no name, just a single phrase. I read the standard. Meet me alone. 9 p.m. The Zurich Bell Tower. Julien raised an eyebrow when she showed him. You're really going? Henrietta didn't hesitate. Yes. It was snowing lightly when she arrived. The bell tower was closed to tourists this late. But Henrietta knew the way in. She'd helped fund the tower's last restoration project 6 years ago, in exchange for a single master key, given under the condition it would never be used for political gain. She smiled at the memory. Tonight, it wasn't political. It was personal. Inside, in the upper chamber, standing beside the giant brass bell, was Dario Velez. He didn't speak immediately. Henrietta let the silence stretch. Finally, he exhaled. "They're going to crucify me for this." Henrietta tilted her head. "Then don't stand where they can reach." Dario chuckled bitterly. "You always did know how to cut through the noise." He turned toward her. "I didn't come to debate. I came to confess." She stayed quiet. "I read the Julian Standard. Not the summary, not the blog pieces. Every page, every line. And I hate how much of it is right." Henrietta folded her arms. "You always said passengers should adapt to the realities of travel. Maybe it's time airlines adapt to the realities of humanity." Dario ran a hand through his graying hair. "I want out of the Sky-Axis Alliance." Henrietta didn't blink. "And? I want in. Not publicly. Not yet. But if I can quietly bring Aero Meridian into early compliance, maybe others follow." Henrietta studied him. "Why now?" He didn't lie. "My daughter was racially profiled in Rome last week. At a gate I helped design." He looked away. "I built a machine that doesn't see people, and now my own child's caught in the gears." Back at the estate, Julien listened carefully as Henrietta debriefed him. "He's scared," Julien said. "He's awake," Henrietta corrected. "And that matters more." Julien leaned back. "What happens when his alliance finds out?" Henrietta's expression sharpened. "They won't. Not unless we make the first move." 3 mornings later, Aero Meridian quietly updated its investor ethics report. Buried in the footnotes was a small statement. "We are piloting integration of third-party transparency frameworks, including the Julian Standard, to evaluate baseline ethics compliance in North American operations." The news was discovered by a teenage Reddit user tracking ESG reports for fun. By noon, it had gone viral. By 3 p.m., every airline in the Sky-Axis Alliance was calling Dario's office. By 5 p.m., Dario shut off his phone. In a studio in New York, Julien prepared for the biggest interview of his life. Global Spotlight, a prime-time live broadcast debate series with millions of viewers and an unapologetically sharp moderator, Sierra Lee. Julien had watched her tear apart senators, CEOs, even a Nobel laureate. She didn't play softball, and tonight, she wanted him. Julien adjusted his mic. The producer gave the 3-second countdown. Red light blinked on. Sierra didn't waste time. "You're 13. You've never worked a real job. You've never built a business. Yet here you are, dictating how airlines should behave. Arrogant or inspired?" Julien didn't flinch. "I've never worked for an airline, no. But I've flown on them. I've seen kids humiliated, elders ignored, language used as a weapon instead of a bridge." He met her gaze. "Maybe the people who built this system shouldn't be the only ones allowed to fix it." Sierra arched an eyebrow. "So, you're saying adults failed?" "I'm saying accountability doesn't have an age limit." The audience was dead silent. Then, a ripple of applause. Back in Geneva, Henrietta watched the interview unfold on a muted TV. A notification popped up on her phone. Encrypted. From Dario. "They're calling an emergency summit. They think I'm going rogue. I told them it's not rogue if it's right." She smiled. Just as Julien said on air, "This isn't about replacing anyone. It's about raising the floor so no one falls through again." And somewhere, far beyond the cameras and tweets, the wind truly began to shift. The emergency summit took place in Zurich, behind closed doors. All 11 members of the Sky-Axis Alliance gathered. No press, no leaks, just fury. Dario Velez walked into that room knowing exactly what to expect. "You've jeopardized all of us," barked CEO Karen Leung of Eastern Crest. "You gave the boy legitimacy," added Franz Muller of Nordflight. "What's next?" Let him audit our crew rosters? Dario didn't flinch. I didn't give him legitimacy. He earned it by holding a mirror to a system we built and then neglected. The room stiffened. Karen leaned forward, voice sharp. This is a billion-dollar ecosystem. We don't change protocols based on TikTok clips and teenage tantrums. Dario calmly replied, We didn't listen to our own passengers for a decade. Maybe it takes a kid to remind us who we fly for. A murmur rose across the room, but it was Franz who delivered the blow. We've contacted federal compliance regulators. If Aero Meridian integrates the Julian standard, we'll call for a public audit of every single system you operate, including legacy staffing, pay equity, and route allocations. Translation: We'll air your dirty laundry if you don't fall back in line. Dario stood. Then I hope your closets are cleaner than mine. And with that, he walked out. Back in Geneva, Julien sat on the veranda, watching the gray sky swirl above the hills. He didn't know about the Zurich meeting yet. He was focused on his notebook, jotting rough drafts for Phase 2 of the public dashboard. He didn't hear Henrietta approach until she gently placed a glass of warm ginger tea beside him. They're going to push harder now, she said. Julien nodded. Let them. Henrietta watched him for a moment. You may be the smartest kid I've ever met, but you still think you're just fighting executives. Julien looked up. I'm not? She sat beside him. You're challenging legacy. That makes people dangerous, not because they're evil, because they're scared. Julien stayed quiet, then finally asked, What if they try to take me down? Personally? Henrietta's eyes hardened. They will. That's why we've already prepared countermeasures. Julien blinked. What? She slid over a sealed folder. Inside were documents, time-stamped footage, testimony, and data sets, all proving past discrimination cases the Alliance tried to bury. You don't win by playing their game, she said. You win by showing the world what they're afraid will be seen. Later that night, while Julien slept, the world moved again. At 4:12 a.m. Geneva time, a press release quietly dropped from a Southeast Asian carrier. Ocean Wing Airways is proud to announce its alignment with the Julian standard. We believe ethics are not regional, they're human. It was unexpected, unscripted, and it shattered the illusion that Julien's support was limited to Western liberal idealism, as some critics claimed. By morning, Twitter/X was ablaze. #Julian Standard trended again, this time across multiple languages. Filipino cabin crew unions voiced support. Japanese students created a translated explainer thread. A Vietnamese newspaper ran the headline, The Gyoy Doi Te Tu Cho Ngoy Kumot Kobe. And quietly, behind the scenes, more airlines began watching. Not with fear, but with curiosity. Because one truth was becoming clear. Ethics was no longer a compliance checkbox, it was a competitive advantage. Julien woke up to 2014 new notifications. But what caught his eye wasn't the numbers. It was a short, anonymous email. No subject, just 6 words. Don't stop, they're breaking inside. He didn't know who sent it, but he smiled. Because somewhere out there, one of them had just cracked. The marble halls of the Grand Accord Center in Brussels had never felt so electrified. Reporters in tailored suits buzzed like bees around CEOs, diplomats, and ESG fund managers. The 9th Annual Global Aviation Ethics Summit was normally just another stage for carefully rehearsed speeches and half-hearted pledges. But this year, a 13-year-old sat in the front row, badge clipped to his blazer that read, Julien Dupont, Lead Architect, Passenger Ethics Framework. Henrietta stood beside him, her hand lightly on his shoulder, not guiding him, anchoring him. Julien adjusted his collar. You nervous? She asked softly. He gave a half smile. I'm not scared of microphones. I'm scared of hypocrisy, she chuckled. Then you'll fit right in today. The moment Julien stepped on stage, the cameras clicked like machine guns. Over 2,000 attendees in the main auditorium. 4 global networks broadcasting live. 6 translation booths whispering his words into Mandarin, Spanish, French, Arabic, Hindi, and Swahili. He began simply. My name is Julian DuPont. I was asked to speak today not because I'm famous, but because something unfair happened to me, and instead of just being mad, I decided to build something. He paused. The Julian Standard isn't about me. It's about making sure the next kid who gets humiliated on a plane has more power than silence. The applause wasn't loud, but it was honest. Julian continued. He spoke of quiet dignity, of code written late into the night, of stories from passengers who felt invisible, of crew members who secretly thanked him. And as he spoke, people leaned in. Not because he was polished, but because he was raw. And then it happened. Excuse me, the voice cut across the room like a shard of glass. It was Dale Whitmore, CEO of Global Star Aviation, one of the oldest, richest airline conglomerates in the Western Hemisphere. He stood up, arms folded. Julian, tell me, how many flights have you run? How many pilots have you trained? How many investor calls have you taken? Julian blinked. None, he answered simply. A ripple of whispers. Dale pressed harder. And yet you claim the right to tell us how to operate? Julian stepped forward. I don't tell pilots how to fly. I'm not trying to run your operations. I'm trying to protect the people who pay to sit in your seats. Shouldn't that matter? Dale smirked. You're emotional. You're a child. You have no stake in this. Julian didn't break eye contact. Sir, when I was 10, a crew member accused me of stealing from a first-class cabin. I was escorted off the plane. I missed my grandmother's funeral. The room went silent. Julian's voice stayed steady. That's the first stake I had in this industry. The silence became uncomfortable. Julian didn't stop. You say I'm too emotional, but maybe the problem is that this industry hasn't been emotional enough. When human dignity becomes inconvenient to profit, something's broken. Then he turned to the audience. And the broken thing won't fix itself. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the room erupted. Not because they agreed, but because they could no longer deny that the game had changed. Backstage, ESG fund manager Karina Bellamy of Ethos Capital approached Henrietta. I'm in, she said. Henrietta tilted her head. Define in. Karina pulled up a doc on her phone. $320 million ESG portfolio. We're going to update our compliance threshold to include Julian Standard scoring for all future airline allocations. If they don't pass, they don't get our capital. Henrietta arched an eyebrow. You're moving fast. Karina grinned. We've been moving slow for too long. That night in their Geneva estate, Henrietta received an email. No subject, encrypted sender, just one line. They're preparing to strike. This time, it's personal. Her smile faded. Julian was winning on the stage. But somewhere behind closed doors, the real war was just beginning. By sunrise, the digital smear campaign had begun. It started with a blog post on a fringe site accusing Julian of faking his story for internet clout. The article had no byline, no source, just screenshots out of context and wild speculation about Henrietta puppeteering her grandson for financial gain. By noon, 3 more outlets picked it up. By evening, a high-profile podcast host ran with it, spinning conspiracies into primetime drama. What if this whole thing is a PR stunt by old money elites who want to play social justice saviors? Henrietta read the transcript in silence. Julian sat across the table from her, his face pale. It's everywhere, he murmured. She didn't sugarcoat it. It will get worse before it gets better. In a private conference room buried beneath their Geneva estate, Henrietta convened an emergency meeting. Present, their lead counsel, crisis communication strategist, and platform security specialist. We're not just protecting a brand, Henrietta said. We're protecting a child and a movement. The comms strategist leaned forward. We can release the unedited footage of the Rome incident, the one Julienne never used. Henrietta shook her head. No, that's not our first move. We don't validate lies with proof. We drown them in truth. The lawyer nodded. We sue? Henrietta smiled thinly. No, we shadow. Meanwhile, Julienne did something he hadn't done since he started the project. He turned off his phone. He shut down his laptop. He went outside, and he sat under the old olive tree in the backyard, the one his grandfather had planted before he was born. Tears burned behind his eyes, but didn't fall. Instead, he whispered the only thing that helped him feel grounded. If the system fears transparency, then let light be the loudest answer. He repeated it until his breath slowed. And when he stood up, he wasn't scared anymore. He was angry. The kind of quiet, calculating anger that doesn't burn. It builds. Later that night, as Henrietta reviewed the next wave of counter-strategies, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Untraceable code. She hesitated, then answered. A gravelly voice spoke on the other end. Henrietta. She froze. Edgar Rollins, former CEO of Nova Fly, one of Julienne's loudest critics. The man who once laughed during a live debate and said, "If we let kids write ethics rules, we'll be serving juice boxes in first class." Henrietta's voice was icy. To what do I owe the irony? Edgar didn't joke. They've gone too far. What they're doing to that boy. I didn't sign up for this. Henrietta said nothing. Edgar continued. They want to leak school files, dig up dirt. If they can't destroy his credibility, they'll try to ruin his life. Henrietta's jaw tightened. And what do you want, Edgar? He hesitated. I want out. She blinked. You're switching sides? No, Edgar said. I'm joining the right one, if there's still room. Julienne watched from the window as the stars flickered. The war had started. But so had the shift. And in the stillness of that Geneva night, as ethics and power clashed across continents, the boy who once lost a seat on a plane had just taken a seat at the head of the table. 3 days after the smear campaign began, Julienne sent out 12 envelopes. No threats, no lawsuits. Just one-page letters, written by hand. Each envelope was embossed with a small silver emblem, the symbol of open air. Inside, a single sentence. I'd like to invite you to help write the future, not fight the past. And beneath that, a signature, Julian DuPont. Henrietta raised an eyebrow as she watched him seal the last one. No warnings? No demands? Julian looked up. If we drag them into the light, they'll fight. But if we invite them to stand in it, maybe they'll see something new. She paused. That's idealistic. He smiled faintly. That's strategic. The first response came from Dale Whitmore. Short, cruel. You may fool the public, boy, but I don't sign bedtime stories. We run airlines, not therapy circles. Then came Franz Müller. We are not interested in redesigning principles for emotional comfort. Julienne read each one silently, then moved them to a folder labeled, Not Ready Yet. But then something happened he didn't expect. A call came from CEO Raj Mehra of Sapphire Wings, one of the largest transcontinental carriers in the Indian Ocean route block. I don't agree with all you're doing, Raj said on the video call. But I've watched how you handled being attacked. He looked Julienne in the eye through the screen. You never punched back. That means something. Julienne nodded. Will you come? Raj didn't hesitate. I'll listen. Henrietta moved quickly. Within 72 hours, she coordinated a private summit in Lucerne. 8 people were invited. 4 CEOs, 2 airline ethics advisors, 1 federal aviation regulator, and Julienne. The venue, a 300-year-old monastery turned conference retreat, where phones were checked at the door and conversation was sacred. They called it the Quiet Table. It started tense. CEO Simone Dagenet of Eurosky slammed her mug down as soon as the second session began. Let's be honest. None of us came here because we trust this process. We came to save face. No one disagreed. Julian didn't flinch. I didn't come here to punish anyone, he said. I came because I believe passengers aren't your enemies, and neither am I. There was a beat of silence. Then Rajmera asked, What do you really want, Julian? Julian looked down at the table, then back up. I want a future where no child is ever told they don't belong because of how they look or where they sit. And I want it written into the rules, not just spoken at press conferences. Simone scoffed. That sounds like policy theater. Julian calmly replied, If protecting dignity feels like theater, maybe the real drama is how we've normalized cruelty. The room fell quiet. Henrietta stood. She handed out a thin document, 5 pages long. Across the top, the Passenger Integrity Accord, Draft 1.0. We're not asking for signatures today, she said. We're asking for voices. Each section of the accord detailed scenarios: crew behavior toward children traveling alone, equity and first-class service delivery, escalation protocol when passengers are flagged, bias reporting systems and audit transparency. Simone flipped through the pages, arms crossed. This will cost airlines millions in retraining. Henrietta nodded. And it'll save billions in lawsuits, bad press, and broken trust. That evening, over dinner, something cracked. CEO Henry Klein of Alpine Air, once a vocal opponent, asked Julianne quietly, Was it true what you said about missing your grandmother's funeral? Julianne nodded once. Henry Klein didn't speak for a long time, then quietly said, My daughter was once accused of faking her epilepsy to get priority boarding. She hasn't flown since. His eyes welled up. The room shifted. He took a pen from his pocket. I'll sign. And just like that, so did Raj. Simone held the paper in her hand. She didn't speak, but she didn't leave either. Sometimes, not walking away is the first signature. The next morning, a call came from Geneva, the office of the United Nations Youth Inclusion Council. Julianne Dupont, we'd like to formally invite you to address the General Assembly. Henrietta picked up the phone, stunned. Why? She asked. The coordinator simply replied, Because he's not just shifting an industry, he's showing us how change speaks, when power listens. The United Nations didn't look like power from the outside. From the curb, it looked like bureaucracy and glass and concrete. But the moment Julian stepped inside, he felt it. It wasn't the armed security. It wasn't the polished marble floors. It was the silence, the kind of silence that precedes history. Henrietta placed a hand on his back as they waited in the wings. This is a different audience, she whispered. Some of them will agree with you. Some will want you to fail. Julian nodded. I'm not speaking for agreement. Henrietta raised an eyebrow. He continued, I'm speaking for the kids who can't stand here. As the moderator introduced Julianne Dupont, a few whispers could already be heard from the diplomatic rows. A child? This is symbolic. Is this what the UN has come to? But Julian didn't flinch. He stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked directly into the sea of suits and translation headsets. And then he began. I'm not here today because I'm brave. I'm here because I was humiliated. A pause. I was told I didn't belong, that my seat didn't matter, that my presence was a problem. He let the silence breathe. And then I realized that seat didn't belong to me because of a boarding pass. It belonged to me because I'm a human being. A few nods. One delegate leaned forward. Julian didn't talk about revenge. He talked about a blind girl named Yasmin, who was yelled at for not following visual safety signs. He talked about a refugee boy who was denied water because he couldn't ask in English. He talked about an elderly woman in Atlanta whose accent made the crew treat her like a child. He told stories, raw, aching, human. Then he said, You can't legislate empathy, but you can choose accountability. He lifted a small folder. This is the Julian Standard, built from stories, measured by integrity. It doesn't punish mistakes. It prevents cruelty. And then he closed with one line. If you still need someone to be older, richer, or more powerful before you'll listen, then maybe the problem isn't the child speaking. Maybe it's the adult refusing to hear. Silence. Then a single clap. Then a wave. Then the room stood. Delegates from 81 countries, a few wiping their eyes, a few stiff with pride, but all standing. Backstage, Henrietta didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her eyes were glassy. Her hand rested on her chest. Then one delegate stepped forward, a woman in a green wrap dress with a silver pin on her lapel. "Julian," she said, in a soft Kenyan accent. "My name is Leila Mwangi. I lost my younger brother because he was too afraid to ask for help during a layover in Frankfurt. Your speech brought him back." She touched the pin. "I'll be introducing a motion next week to adopt the Julian standard across African Union-regulated airspace, and I will not be the only one." Julian didn't speak. He just nodded, then whispered, "Thank you." Far away in a corner boardroom in New York, Dale Whitmore watched the speech on a muted screen. His assistant hovered nervously behind him. "You want me to draft a response?" Dale exhaled through his nose. "No." He poured a glass of scotch. "We just lost the moral high ground. The attacks didn't come all at once. They came like a tide. Slow at first, then overwhelming. The first was a tweet, anonymous, poorly written. Julian DuPont isn't what he seems. Ask his schoolmates. Nobody paid it much attention, until a verified account reposted it. Then another. Then a video clip surfaced. Shaky, blurry, allegedly showing Julian yelling at a cafeteria worker. Except it wasn't him. The footage had been cropped, color shifted, and the voice dubbed. But the damage was done. In a dark conference room in Dallas, a group of executives sat around a screen. Dale Whitmore's voice cut through the room. "Facts don't move markets. Perception does." He pointed at the paused video. "All we have to do is introduce doubt. One crack in that kid's halo, and the whole thing collapses." A man at the table asked, "And if it doesn't?" Dale smirked. "Then we flood the sky with noise, enough smoke, and no one will know where the fire is." Henrietta slammed the folder onto Julian's desk. 3 edited clips, 2 fake testimonials, and now a bounty. Julian blinked. "A bounty?" She handed him a printout from a private Telegram channel. $5,000 for anyone with proof Julian DuPont is a fraud. Bonus for emotional content, NDA enforced. Julian stared at it. "This is coordinated." Henrietta's jaw was tight. "It's war." The tipping point came on a Thursday. Julian was flying into Chicago O'Hare to speak with a regional union of crew trainers. Henrietta had warned him not to travel alone, but he insisted. "I'm not a threat. I shouldn't have to act like one." The flight landed. A woman in a brown jacket approached him just before the exit gate. "You're Julian DuPont?" He nodded. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" "Terminal B." He followed her. That was the last safe moment of the day. Terminal B was under construction. Dim, echoey. Julian realized too late they weren't headed to a conference room, but to a vacant baggage area. Then another man appeared, mid-40s, holding a camera phone. The woman turned to Julian. "Just tell the truth. You think crew members are inherently biased, don't you?" Julian shook his head. "No, I think systems create blind spots. I think..." The man interrupted, voice rising. "So, you're saying my wife, who served 18 years as head flight attendant, is racist?" Julian backed up. "I never said that. I don't know your wife." The woman stepped forward, feigning hurt. "Oh my God, he just raised his voice at me." Click, phone flashing, recording. "Julian DuPont screaming at a woman at O'Hare," the man muttered with satisfaction. Julian froze. "Stop twisting this, please. This isn't..." The man grinned. "You just lost." By the time Henrietta got the call, the clip was already on 6 accounts, then 40, Then national news. Viral. Teen aviation activist yells at woman in airport. Is the Julian standard a sham? From prodigy to problem, the fall of a 13-year-old ethics crusader. Henrietta was furious, but controlled. They used him like bait, and we walked right into it. She ordered every partner platform to issue takedown notices. Most complied, but the damage had metastasized. That night, Julian sat in his room, staring at the muted television. Every channel had his face. Every anchor had an angle. One even called him a minor moralist with a martyr complex. He shut the screen off and looked at his phone. Hundreds of messages, most hateful, some confused. And then, one video. A little boy, maybe 9 years old, sitting on a couch, nervous but firm. He looked into the camera and said, "I saw Julian once, at gate 12. A man told me to move to the back. Julian stepped in. He didn't yell. He just said, 'Everyone deserves to fly with dignity.' So, if they're saying he's mean, I don't believe it, 'cause I saw who he really is." Henrietta forwarded it to Julianne. The subject line just said, "Not everyone believes the lie." Julianne watched it twice, then whispered, "We go back to the beginning." The next morning, the headline shifted again. Not because the corporations backed down, but because kids started posting, one by one. A 15-year-old girl from Atlanta posted, "Julian stayed up until midnight once to help me finish my speech on disability rights. He didn't even know me." A boy from Detroit uploaded a video of Julian picking up his dropped sketchbook in an airport, flipping through it and saying, "This belongs on walls someday." They weren't viral influencers. They weren't lawyers or CEOs. But their truth was louder than the noise. Julian stood in front of a mirror, suit wrinkled, eyes tired. Henrietta stood behind him with a lint roller, gently fixing his collar. "You still want to address the Ethics Council tomorrow?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "Yes, but I want to speak differently now." Henrietta tilted her head. "How?" Julian looked up, voice calm. "I don't want to defend myself. I want to challenge the system." At the International Airline Ethics Council the next day, the room was tense. Julian stood before a semicircle of regulators, airline execs, and policy architects. Behind him was a single slide. Black background, white text. Noise is not the same as truth. He spoke slowly, clearly. "You all saw a clip. You heard opinions. But none of you asked why someone would go that far to discredit a child." He turned to face them fully. "The attacks on me were never really about me. They were about control. If a 13-year-old can expose gaps in how we treat passengers, then maybe the system isn't just flawed. It's fragile." A regulator from Spain interjected, "You're suggesting industry retaliation?" Julian nodded. "I'm not suggesting it. I'm showing it." He held up a file, printouts of telegram messages, private memos, edited metadata from the viral clip. Henrietta had quietly pulled legal strings to acquire it. The room shifted. Then Julian did something unexpected. He took a step back from the mic and invited someone forward. It was the boy from the video, the one who'd said, "That's not Julian." His name was Elijah Chen, 10 years old, nervous, but brave. Julian gave him space. Elijah looked at the council and said, "If you ignore good people because one bad video says something, then you're not protecting truth. You're protecting the people who are afraid of it." Silence. Then, someone from the Canadian delegation whispered to their neighbor, "That's better than half our lobbyists." 3 hours later, behind closed doors, the council voted. Not on whether Julian should be silenced, but on whether independent ethics protections for whistleblower passengers should be fast-tracked into the new Passenger Integrity Accord. It passed. 7-2. That night, Julian sat with Henrietta on a bench overlooking the lake behind the council building. He was quiet. She handed him a thermos of hot chocolate and asked, "Did you know that would happen?" He shook his head. No, she smiled. Then why did you do it? He thought for a second, then looked up at the stars. Because even when the truth gets buried, it still knows how to rise. Henrietta nodded slowly. And now they do too. The email came at 2:14 a.m. Julien was half asleep when the chime went off. He blinked at the screen and saw the subject line. From Avani Kapoor. Subject, we're with you. He sat up. It wasn't a fan message. It wasn't spam. It was from the Minister of Transport for India. Avani Kapoor's message was simple. Julien, I watched your address. So did my son. He's 11. Last year he was removed from a first-class lounge for looking out of place. You gave him back his voice. We're ready to bring the Julien standard to our international routes. Let's talk. Julien didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the screen, stunned. Then Henrietta walked in, holding 2 mugs. She took one look at his face and asked, India? He nodded. And that's not all, she added, handing over a tablet. On the screen were headlines from the past 12 hours. Indonesia Aviation Board requests meeting with Julien DuPont team. South Africa's Ethics Council urges industry to consider youth-led standards. Chile's National Airport Association to pilot passenger dignity training. One line in a comment thread stood out. What if kids are the only ones still telling the truth? That afternoon, Julien and Henrietta were in a high-security Zoom with representatives from 7 countries. Most were senior officials. Some were ethics officers. One was a commercial airline CEO. Avani Kapoor was the first to speak. We've reviewed the Julien standard. It's practical, clear, and most importantly, built around empathy. We are prepared to incorporate it into all future regulatory audits, but we'd like one condition. Julien leaned in. Avani continued, that you remain part of the oversight board, not as a child token, but as a co-author. Henrietta's eyes widened. That was no small offer. Julien nodded slowly. I'd be honored. Meanwhile, in Geneva, Dale Whitmore watched the meeting replay through a private feed. He turned to his legal advisor. They're moving faster than we calculated. The lawyer cleared his throat. There's something else. One of our board members leaked. Dale's hand stopped midair. What? The lawyer tapped a tablet. A screenshot appeared. Top executive from Skyport Corp resigns. Backs Julien standard. Passengers are not commodities. I'd rather build with the future than cling to a broken past. Rachel Lynn Dale's jaw tightened. Then it's time for the nuclear option. Back in D.C., Julien walked the marble hallways of the Capitol with Henrietta beside him. He was due to meet with 3 senators backing the U.S. Passenger Ethics Initiative. All 3 had been hesitant. Until now. Inside the briefing room, Senator Hernandez spoke first. Julien, what you're doing is extraordinary, but we have lobbyists breathing down our necks, airlines threatening job cuts. Julien didn't flinch. Let me ask you something. If someone boards a plane and gets humiliated, is that job creation or trauma distribution? The room fell silent. He continued, I'm not asking you to punish airlines. I'm asking you to protect people, especially the ones who never get heard. Senator Kim leaned forward. My niece is autistic. She was once zip-tied to a seat for rocking back and forth. Her voice cracked. She's 9. Julien looked her in the eye. Then you already know why this matters. Senator Hernandez exhaled. You've got my vote. As the Capitol doors closed behind them, Henrietta checked her phone, then stopped in her tracks. Julien turned. What's wrong? She handed him the screen. It was a new headline. Skyport threatens to blacklist airlines that adopt Julien's standard. Underneath was a list of 14 airports and 6 airlines. A direct threat. Julien stared at it for a long time, then quietly said, Then we go higher. Henrietta frowned. How much higher? Julien looked up toward the sky. Global. 2 days later, Julien was invited to Tokyo. Not by an airline, not by a government, by a consortium of airport engineers, ethics scholars, and a retired Japanese aviation minister named Satoshi Moriyama. Moriyama was 78. He had a cane, a reputation for blunt honesty, and a signature blue kimono he wore at all formal events. Julien had barely stepped off the plane when Moriyama bowed and said, "Julien-san, when truth is under attack, only two kinds of people remain, the ones who whisper and the ones who build." Julien bowed deeply in return. "I'm here to build." They met in a traditional tatami room overlooking Mount Takao. Moriyama opened the meeting with no preamble. "Our research group has drafted a new ethics verification protocol. It links biometric check-in systems, employee behavior audits, and an AI-based fairness index. But we need one thing." Julien leaned in. "What's that?" "A face, a voice, and someone who already took the first punch." Julien paused, then, "You're asking me to front the initiative?" "No," Moriyama said calmly. "I'm asking you to lead it." Henrietta, watching from across the room, was stunned. This was no symbolic offer. This was institutional power, global legitimacy, a new framework built from Julien's ordeal that would become the World Passenger Integrity Accord, the first international protocol protecting passengers based on dignity, equity, and accountability. Julien took a breath, then shook Moriyama's hand. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Julien met with UN transport delegates, gave a surprise speech at a civil aviation expo in Singapore, and hosted a live-stream Q&A with youth passengers from 18 countries. The hashtag #HadJulienStandard trended globally for 3 days straight. But not everyone was celebrating. At Skyport headquarters in London, Dale Whitmore watched in quiet rage as his global influence crumbled. He wasn't just a CEO. He was the architect of the current industry status quo. Unregulated AI scanning, discriminatory loyalty algorithms, and exploitative gate clearance delays masked as security. If the Julien Standard became law, his empire would shrink by 60% overnight. His assistant entered, face pale. "Sir, we've just been removed from the Canadian Civil Aviation Trust list." Dale's eyes narrowed. "Send the lawyers, and call Zurich." Back in Maryland, Julien sat in the garden behind Henrietta's house. It was 11:45 p.m. He hadn't slept. But this wasn't exhaustion. It was something else, a mix of clarity and pressure. Henrietta joined him, carrying 2 mugs. "Couldn't sleep?" Julien shook his head. "Feels like I'm standing on top of a mountain I didn't even know I was climbing." Henrietta smiled softly. "You didn't climb it. You became it." Julien turned toward her. "What if they try something worse? Then we do something better." Just before sunrise, Julien made a decision. He picked up his tablet and opened a secure collaboration board shared by leaders from India, South Africa, Japan, Brazil, Canada, and the US. He typed only one sentence: "Let's activate Phase 2, Full Transparency Protocol." Within 7 minutes, he got 5 green check marks and 1 thumbs up emoji. The Full Transparency Protocol was simple. Every airline that opted in would publicly release their incident logs. Passenger complaints would be visualized in real-time. Cabin crew training footage would be archived with time-stamped review access. Racial, age-based, and disability-related conflict data would be published quarterly. All board-level decisions regarding ethics would be disclosed to passengers. Within 72 hours, 11 airlines joined. 3 of them were Skyport's former partners. Then came the final twist. A whistleblower from inside Skyport. Her name was Dr. Linnea Voss, a former VP of Systems Architecture. She went on a global webcast and revealed that Skyport had built behavioral profiling into its boarding system, flagging passengers by perceived compliance based on race, accent, and body language. Julien was watching the stream in real time. Linnea looked directly into the camera and said, "I left because I met a boy who believed passengers shouldn't have to beg for dignity. His name is Julien Dupont, and what he's building is the future." For the first time in weeks, Julian didn't speak. He just let the silence wrap around him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It never really was. That night, Henrietta sat beside him in the dark. "You know they're going to try again, right?" Julian nodded. "But this time," he said quietly, "we're not alone." The hall was silent. The International Civil Aviation Assembly hadn't been this packed since the post-pandemic charter vote. Delegates from 27 countries, 6 global airline CEOs, 3 UN ethics advisors, and in the center, Julianne DuPont, seated beside Henrietta Caldwell. The chairwoman's gavel echoed across the chamber. Today's vote will determine whether the Julian Standard becomes the foundation of the new Passenger Ethics Accord. Any member may speak before the final tally. A pause. Then a delegate from France stood. "My son is 12. He watched Julian's story unfold like a movie. But what struck me wasn't the injustice. It was the courage. We cannot afford to delay justice for the next generation." Applause. Then another from Kenya. "The issue is not about one boy. It's about millions. If the skies belong to everyone, then dignity must be non-negotiable." One by one, voices rose, and then silence again. In a private room 2 floors below, Dale Whitmore was watching the live feed with clenched fists. His final strategy had failed. 3 countries he thought were in his pocket had just endorsed the Julian Standard. He turned to his aide. "If this goes through, we're finished." The aide didn't reply. Instead, he slid a resignation letter across the table. Dale didn't even look at it. Back in the main chamber, the final vote was cast. The gavel struck again. By a vote of 25-2, the Passenger Ethics Accord, led by the Julian Standard, is adopted. The room erupted. Delegates stood, shaking hands, applauding. Julian sat still for a second, then turned to Henrietta. "Is it real?" She smiled, tears brimming. "It's law." The next morning, headlines filled every global outlet. Julian Standard passes. A new era of passenger rights begins. Teen who took on airlines reshapes global aviation law. From humiliation to reform, the boy who made 1.7B. Freeze and history melt. At Skyport, chaos. 2 board members resigned. The stock dropped 17%. 3 partner airports suspended cooperation. And Dale Whitmore? He was subpoenaed. The ethics probe into Skyport's discriminatory architecture would take months. But it had already begun. Meanwhile, Julian stood at the airport. Not to fly, but to unveil the first Julian Standard passenger terminal, redesigned with inclusive signage, real-time transparency screens, sensory rooms for neurodivergent travelers, and AI-free conflict zones monitored by human ethics liaisons. A boy approached him, maybe 9, wide-eyed. "Are you the kid who made the planes fair?" Julian crouched to eye level. "No," he smiled. "I'm the kid who helped remind them how to fly right." Later that evening, Julian sat with Henrietta by the window. Lights from the newly recertified terminal glowed in the distance. "So what now?" he asked. Henrietta sipped her tea. "Now, we rest, for a moment, and then we help others do what you just did." He looked out at the runway and quietly said, "Let's make sure no kid ever has to choose between staying quiet or standing alone." Henrietta nodded. "They won't. Not anymore." What would you have done if you were Julian on that flight? Would you have stayed silent or made the call that changed everything? Tell us in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories, city by city, country by country. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes justice is too big for one person. Because sometimes one person is exactly enough. Stay strong, stay kind. "Excuse me, this section isn't for coach passengers." That was the first thing Clara heard as she looked up. No smile, no greeting, just accusation. The flight attendant, tall, polished, and visibly annoyed, stood over her with her arms crossed, eyes already scanning Clara like she was a security risk. Clara blinked. She hadn't even taken off her headphones yet. "Sorry?" she asked. The woman didn't answer the question. Instead, she stepped in closer, her voice low but cold. "You need to move. First class is for confirmed ticket holders only." Clara reached into her hoodie pocket and calmly pulled out her boarding pass. "It's 1A, she said, holding it up. The woman snatched it like she'd been waiting to catch a thief. She glanced at it once, barely a second, then narrowed her eyes. "This looks printed," she said. "Because it is," Clara replied, already feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I checked in online, like it says to." The flight attendant said, clearly unimpressed. "And where are your parents?" There it is. That line again. That question that didn't sound like concern, more like suspicion. Clara exhaled. "I'm traveling alone. I'm 15. It's not my first flight." The woman gave a tight smile, but the damage was already done. She turned toward the intercom and said without hesitation, "Can I get security up front? We have an unaccompanied minor in first class with an unverified boarding pass." And just like that, Clara Bennett, age 15, with a valid ticket in her hand, was being removed from first class in front of a full cabin of strangers. If this happened to your child, what would you do? Tell us where you're watching from. This one's going to hit hard. The entire cabin seemed to freeze. The murmurs started like static. A middle-aged couple across the aisle exchanged glances. A man in 2D took out his phone. Not to film. Not yet. Just in case. Clara sat perfectly still, refusing to shrink even an inch. But inside, her chest burned. This wasn't the first time someone looked at her. Brown skin, oversized hoodie, sneakers, and decided she didn't fit where she was. But it never stopped hurting. It never stopped being humiliating. She straightened her shoulders and stared ahead. The leather seat smelled like citrus cleaner. She held onto the armrest like it might anchor her to dignity. Within seconds, 2 security staff in gray airport polos entered from the front cabin. One looked young, almost nervous. The other moved with the weariness of someone who'd seen this too many times. "She's not listed in our gate manifest," the flight attendant declared, handing over Clara's pass. "It looks like a fake." The older officer squinted at it, then at Clara. "This says 1A. She's in 1A. "I've already contacted the front desk," the attendant insisted. "There's a chance she snuck up here during general boarding." That was it. Clara stood up, slowly, calmly, but her voice shook just a little. "I didn't sneak anywhere," she said. "I was seated by the gate attendant. I scanned my boarding pass. I followed every rule. The only thing I did wrong was sit in a seat some people don't think I deserve." The younger officer looked uncomfortable. The older one hesitated. But the flight attendant was already waving toward the back. "Just move her while we sort this out." "Miss," the younger guard said gently, "why don't we step to the back while we get this cleared up?" Clara's fingers curled into her palm. This wasn't about security. This was about appearance, prejudice, control. And she was done playing nice. "I'll go," she said, grabbing her backpack. "But you're making a mistake." Rhonda, the attendant, smiled again. "It's not personal. It's never personal, until the whole system falls apart." Clara walked down the narrow aisle like it was a tunnel of shame. Passengers craned their necks. Some whispered. A few frowned. But none said a word. She reached row 34, middle seat, crammed between a man already snoring and a teenage boy who smelled like energy drinks. She sat, swallowed the lump in her throat, and reached slowly into her backpack. From a hidden pocket, she pulled out a sleek, matte black device, no bigger than a phone. Fingerprint locked, military-grade encrypted. She tapped the screen. Access granted, fail-safe protocol, Tier 5. Her mother had built it. Helena Sinclair, engineer, whistleblower, and the reason Clara now carried this responsibility. Before she died in a still controversial crash 3 years ago, Helena had coded one final backdoor into the system she helped design, Airgate Lock. It powered coordination between 42 federal airports, ensuring gate access complied with ethics codes, behavior audits, and minor protection protocols. Clara didn't have full control, but she had something just as powerful: the authority to flag an airline for ethics breach. And when a verified Tier 5 account flagged a flight, gates froze. Contracts paused. FAA audits triggered. Clara stared down at the screen. Her pulse was steady now. Ethics violation code, passenger discrimination, minor, flight, Skynova 761, gate, Sea Oak, date, June 5th, action, trigger failsafe. She tapped once. No dramatic alarms, no flashing lights. Just a silent cascade of systems syncing behind the scenes. Elsewhere, at Oakland International, a red light blinked in the operations center. Then San Diego. Then LAX. One by one, terminals connected to the air gate lock flagged the same flight. Within 4 minutes, 3 airports suspended inbound authorization from Skynova. 2 international hubs rejected their incoming landing requests. FAA's Ethics Division received a silent ping tagged Clara Bennett failsafe. And Skynova's internal dashboard showed one blinking message. Flight 761, ethics breach confirmed. Lockdown initiated. Back in row 34C, Clara put the device away. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She just sat back, hands folded on her lap. For the first time in 20 minutes, she could finally breathe. She'd been taught, real power doesn't raise its voice. It changes the room, silently, permanently. The first sign that something was wrong came not in the air, but on the ground. 75 miles south, at the Gate Authority Control Center in San Jose. A single amber alert blinked on a terminal labeled Gate Lock, Sky 761. Anomaly triggered. Most gate alerts were routine. Last-minute maintenance, gate changes, weather diversions. But this one was different. It came coded as Fail-Safe Protocol, Tier 5 Verified Source. Within 20 seconds, a red light flared on 3 other terminals. The supervisor, a man named Rafael Cruz, with 23 years in airport logistics, leaned in. He recognized the name attached to the Tier 5 signature, Clara Bennett. He sat up straighter. That name hadn't appeared in their system in years, not since her mother, Helena Sinclair, had been confirmed dead in the Seattle crash that still stirred whispers in FAA circles. Raphael knew what this meant. Put a hold on all inbound gates linked to Skynova Flight 761, he said without waiting for the system to process. Notify Oakland, San Diego, and LAX. Execute gate lock freeze under Section B14. The room went silent. Then came the real echo. The flight was airborne now, but just barely. The seatbelt sign was still lit. Clara sat quietly in row 34C, pretending to scroll through music on her phone. The little device was back in her bag, dark, silent, but it had already done its job. 3 rows ahead, Rhonda the flight attendant strode up and down the aisle, still wearing the face of someone who thought she'd done the right thing. Still smug. Still untouched. Clara didn't make a scene. That wasn't the point. She just waited. It started with the pilot's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Flores. We've been asked to maintain current altitude while we wait for clearance confirmation from Oakland. Should be brief. We'll keep you updated. That was odd. Oakland didn't delay clearance this early in the flight. Clara glanced out the window, hiding the small smirk that tugged at the corner of her mouth. A young controller named Devin tapped nervously at his headset. I've never seen this before, he muttered. Skynova 761 is locked out of all gates. Every landing authorization is reading red. Gate lock has never failed, his supervisor snapped. Pull backup access from FAA. No good. FAA just confirmed a Level 2 ethics protocol triggered from a Tier 5 device. We're under blackout until the ethics inquiry clears. Who the hell has Tier 5 access? Devin paused, then read the name aloud from the override log. Clara Bennett. Rhonda was mid-pour, refilling a passenger's sparkling water in first class, when the intercom buzzed again. Flight crew, please report to cockpit immediately. Her brow furrowed. It wasn't the usual code. It wasn't turbulence, wasn't cabin issue. The tone was different, urgent, clipped. She handed the bottle to another attendant and moved quickly. Inside the cockpit, Captain Flores didn't look up from the screen. "We've got a problem," he said. "Mechanical? No, political." He turned the tablet so she could see. Sky Nova 761, ethics flagged. Gate access frozen. Federal review pending. Rhonda blinked. What? What does that mean? It means we don't land unless the ethics division clears it. Right now, we've got no gate. Her voice thinned. Is this about that girl? Flores didn't answer. He didn't need to. By now, 4 airports had joined the freeze. Chicago and Denver had received delayed cooperation notices. Toronto refused to accept the inbound swap flight scheduled for next gate slot. Passengers arriving from different Skynova flights were being told their layovers were on hold due to network congestion. But inside industry channels, the word was spreading fast. Someone triggered the Clara Bennett failsafe. And if that name came up, you paused everything. Because her mother's death still cast a long shadow, one filled with black box recordings, whistleblower reports, and unacknowledged ethics violations buried by Skynova. The same airline this girl had just been humiliated on. The captain returned to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently experiencing a delay in landing clearance. We ask for your patience." In economy, passengers stirred. A few groaned. One man swore under his breath. In first class, a businessman pulled down his headphones. "This can't be weather. What's going on?" Rhonda was pale now. She was tapping into the crew communication tablet. Message after message from the Skynova control center scrolled across the screen. "Do not engage with passenger Bennett. Internal review initiated. Federal inquiry in motion. Ethics lockdown triggered. Comply!" She suddenly felt cold. Very cold. A red banner blinked across the top of the secure dashboard. Tier 5 activation. Fail-safe protocol authorized by Clara Bennett. Classification, minor protection violation, immediate evaluation required. An ethics officer named Sonia Chin pulled her glasses down her nose and said quietly, "Someone's in trouble." She hadn't moved. She hadn't said a word. And yet, she had grounded the system. That was the power of being underestimated. The power of silence. The power her mother had taught her, not with revenge, not with shouting, but with infrastructure. With tools no one saw coming. She closed her eyes. She didn't want an apology from Rhonda. She didn't even need her to be embarrassed. She wanted the system that protected people like Rhonda to tremble. And it was trembling. Rhonda sat in the jump seat, gripping her armrest. A message popped up on her tablet. "Crew member identified in ethics report. Internal status, under review. Effective immediately. Suspended from duty pending investigation." She read it 3 times before it sank in. Suspended, not might be, not considered. Just done. Rhonda slowly lifted her eyes and looked toward the back of the plane. She couldn't see Clara, but she didn't need to. She finally understood who she had thrown out. The plane remained in a holding pattern, circling like a quiet storm with nowhere to land. Inside, Clara took out her headphones and scrolled through her notes for the speech she was supposed to give tomorrow. It began, "Ethics is not about rules. It's about what you do when no one thinks you matter." She smiled. She was ready. Back in Berkeley, a landline rang in a sunlit kitchen. Charlotte Bennett hadn't touched that phone in months, because it only rang for one reason. She turned off the stove, wiped her hand on a checkered dish towel, and picked it up. "Charlotte speaking." There was a pause, then a voice, steady, clipped, female. "Mrs. Bennett, this is FAA Ethics Oversight, Division 9. Charlotte's heart didn't skip. It dropped. She didn't ask what this was about. If that line was ringing, something had triggered it. And there was only one person alive who still held Tier 5 emergency access under her late daughter's name. "Where is Clara?" Charlotte asked quietly. "Sky Nova Flight 761, Oakland bound, triggered a Level 2 ethics lockdown. Gate freeze initiated, 5 airports non-compliant, no injuries." A slow exhale. "Good. Ma'am, are you available for a federal ethics coordination call within the next 20 minutes? Charlotte leaned back against the kitchen counter. She hadn't been on a government call in 5 years. They had stopped asking after she declined to sit on the National Ethics Charter Committee. But now... "Yes," she said. "Send me the secure channel. I'll be ready." Meanwhile, on Flight 761, the air had shifted. Passengers in first class were visibly agitated. A woman in pearls tapped her tray table like a nervous metronome. A businessman pulled out his phone to check for Wi-Fi. No signal. Someone whispered about a bomb threat. Others thought it was just tech issues. Only one person on board understood the full scale of what was unfolding. Clara. She hadn't moved from her seat. She didn't gloat. Her hands were still in her lap. Her face unreadable. But deep down, her chest felt heavy. Not with regret, but with gravity. This wasn't just personal now. The whole machine had been stirred. And she knew what came next. Back in Berkeley, Charlotte joined the video call from her secure tablet. 7 faces appeared. FAA oversight officers. 2 from international ethics committees. 1 from the European Civil Aviation Board. And 1 man she didn't recognize until he spoke. "Ms. Bennett," he said, voice like gravel. "I'm David Lind, Interim Director of the U.S. Aviation Ethics Office. I'm stepping in due to the emergency classification." Charlotte nodded once. "What's the damage?" "We have 5 airports under Tier 5 gate lock. Oakland, San Diego, Seattle Tacoma, Toronto Pearson, and London Heathrow." She blinked. "International?" He nodded. "The override system activated on global scope. We didn't even know that protocol still had range after Sinclair's revision." "It does," Charlotte said. "It's built into the failsafe Clara inherited. The question is, what did Sky Nova do?" A second voice joined in. A woman from the International Charter Council. Flight attendant forcibly removed the child from her assigned seat in first class. No documentation request, no verification, just assumption and public dismissal. Another face, a man from ICAO, added, "Clara never declared who she was, never threatened. The trigger was silent." Charlotte's jaw clenched. Of course it was. The silence in the room spoke louder than the words. Finally, someone asked, "Would you be willing to engage your authority as co-drafter of the Bennett Protocol?" Charlotte closed her eyes for half a second. Then, "Yes, but only if we investigate not just the crew, but the culture that enabled this." In the cockpit of Flight 761, Captain Flores sat pale and still. He'd flown 2 Gulf War tours. Nothing had shaken him like this. He turned to Rhonda. "I need to know exactly what you said to her." Rhonda looked defensive. "I didn't do anything wrong. She didn't look like a first-class passenger. She was by herself. I thought maybe she was confused." "You paged security before even checking her ticket. She didn't act like she belonged." "That's the point," he said. "You assumed." Rhonda flushed. "So now I'm a racist?" The pilot didn't answer, but the silence was damning. Back on the ground, the ripple effects had already reached the press. Anonymous sources began leaking fragments. Sky Nova first-class incident involving minor. Tier 5 lockdown triggered by ethics failsafe. Internal FAA systems frozen pending investigation. By the time the plane was cleared to land, redirected to a private gate in Sacramento, 2 hashtags were trending. She belonged in 1A #Bennett failsafe. Clara's name wasn't even in the news yet, but the reaction had begun. At Sacramento Airport, a private car was already waiting on the tarmac. No cameras, no press, just one woman standing with her arms folded, Charlotte Bennett. The moment Clara stepped off the plane, their eyes met. No hugs, No dramatic tears, just recognition. "Hi," Clara said softly. "You okay?" Charlotte asked. Clara nodded. Charlotte tilted her head. "You triggered it?" Clara looked away. "I didn't mean to escalate." "But you didn't stop it." "No." A pause. Then Charlotte smiled. Not warm, but proud. "Good." Inside the terminal, a small conference room had been prepared. 2 FAA agents, an internal compliance officer from Skynova, and a civil rights liaison were waiting. They weren't expecting a teenager to walk in with such calm. Clara sat at the table. The compliance officer cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, we'd like to ask you a few questions." "No," Charlotte interrupted. "She'll listen, and you'll explain." "But," Charlotte pulled out a laminated badge from her purse. FAA Ethics Oversight Authority, Tier 5 Legacy, holder name, Charlotte Sinclair Bennett. The room fell still. The man shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't realize." "You didn't care," Charlotte said, "until you saw fallout." Then Clara leaned forward. "I don't want apologies. I want your internal training protocols. I want your evaluation data on first-class service assignments. I want proof that what happened to me doesn't happen to kids who can't trigger a fail-safe." Everyone in the room went quiet. She added, "Because if you don't fix it, I will." Back at Skynova HQ, CEO Alan Rice sat staring at his tablet. Legal was already in panic mode. 4 investment partners had requested ethics audits. 2 booking platforms suspended Skynova's ad priority. And now, the Bennett family had stepped in. Rice sighed. He tapped his comm. "Tell the board we're calling an emergency session and start drafting a public apology. I want her name on it." "Clara Bennett?" "No, Charlotte." Then he leaned back and whispered under his breath, "God help us if the girl ever speaks." The Skynova executive boardroom wasn't built for apologies. It was built for power. 12 high-back leather chairs, panoramic skyline view, a 10-foot glass table that reflected the ego of every man who had ever sat at it. This morning, it felt like a courtroom. At the far end, Charlotte Bennett sat with her back straight and her eyes sharper than any contract ever signed in that room. Beside her, Clara didn't say a word. She didn't need to, because today wasn't about revenge. It was about reckoning. Alan Rice, CEO of Skynova, walked in late. Not out of disrespect, out of hesitation. He had built this empire, carved it from 3 bankrupt regional airlines, and turned it into a luxury first titan. But now, one mistake by a flight attendant had activated a fail-safe code no one even remembered existed. And now, the girl whose mother co-wrote the very code was sitting at his table. "Good morning," he offered stiffly. Charlotte didn't stand. "Is it?" The FAA representative cleared his throat. "We'll begin with internal review findings. The passenger, Clara Bennett, was removed from her first-class seat without cause or verification. No ID check, no protocol followed, just an assumption based on appearance." One board member interrupted. "We don't train our crews to be racist." Charlotte raised a hand. "Don't." The room froze. She stood, walked slowly to the end of the table, and placed a slim binder in front of them. "This is your real training manual, the unwritten one. You don't say it out loud, but you reward it. You promote the ones who spot trouble early. You call it intuition. We call it profiling." No one spoke. She continued. "Your booking algorithm flags high-risk passengers by zip code. You randomly downgrade bookings when there's a system glitch. But we've run the data. Those glitches affect Black and Latino names 61% more often." A board member flinched. "It's real," Clara said quietly. "You just never thought one of the girls you downgraded would be your regulator's granddaughter." Alan Rice looked directly at Clara. "You're not just a regulator's granddaughter. You're mother's daughter." Clara didn't blink. "Yes," she said, "and I remember everything." That silenced him. Because years ago, Clara's mother, Dr. Helena Sinclair had died mid-flight when a crew ignored her medical bracelet, thinking she was exaggerating. They let her collapse quietly. And the airline? Sky Nova. It had taken 5 years, 2 Senate hearings, and a federal lawsuit to build the fail-safe index. A system where certain legacy ethics holders, those who lost loved ones due to airline negligence, could silently trigger ethics lockdowns if they sensed injustice mid-flight. Charlotte helped design it, and Clara had just used it. The FAA official turned to Alan. "Mr. Rice, the question now is not just how you'll apologize, it's how you'll prove this will never happen again." Alan took a deep breath. "I want to speak plainly." He turned to Clara. "You could have ruined us. That code locked down 5 airports, froze nearly $260 million in operations in less than 7 minutes. If you'd said your name aloud, press would have eaten us alive." Clara shrugged. "I didn't need to. The system spoke for me." He nodded. "And that's why I want to offer you something." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "You owe every kid like me something." "I know," Alan said. "Which is why I'm not just apologizing, I'm proposing reform." An hour later, Sky Nova's public live stream began. A sleek conference room, press badges flashing, microphones poised. Alan Rice stepped up to the podium. No teleprompter, no PR fluff. He cleared his throat. 5 days ago, our airline failed a young girl named Clara Bennett. She was profiled, humiliated, and removed from her seat. First class, fully paid, legally booked, simply because someone didn't think she looked like she belonged. He paused. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand compensation. Instead, she triggered an ethics protocol that exposed our blind spots at every level. He looked into the cameras. This isn't just an apology, it's an overhaul. Behind him, the screens lit up. Sky Nova Reform Package 1.0 Mandatory Ethics Evaluation for Cabin Crew Passenger Fairness Audit System, PFAS. AI Audit of Booking Biases 24-hour Incident Review by External Ethics Council. Launching the Clara Bennett Fellowship, a program that funds future leaders in ethics and aviation reform, starting with 5 M. The room gasped. But Clara? She stayed in the wings, watching, silent, still, powerful. That night, Charlotte and Clara sat at a small rooftop cafe in Berkeley. No suits, no cameras, just grandmother and granddaughter, watching the sun set behind the city that raised them. "Did you expect them to give you that much?" Charlotte asked. Clara shook her head. "I didn't want anything. I just didn't want them to get away with it." Charlotte sipped her tea. "They won't." There was a long silence. Then Clara asked, "Do you think Mom would have been proud?" Charlotte looked out at the skyline. "She would have told you to do it again." Clara never planned to be a symbol. She didn't wake up thinking she'd be on news tickers or trending across platforms she barely used. She didn't ask for interviews, didn't post any videos, and never once shared a single word on her own account. But 3 days after the Sky Nova broadcast, her name was everywhere. Not because she spoke, but because she hadn't. And somehow, silence became the loudest voice in the room. At 7:12 a.m., Clara opened her school-issued Chromebook to check her biology assignment. Instead, the homepage flashed a headline she hadn't expected to see. "The 15-year-old who froze $260 million with a button. Meet Clara Bennett." Next to it was her picture from the airport surveillance footage. Blurred, gray-toned, but unmistakable. She closed the tab. Downstairs, Charlotte was brewing coffee and reading the Times. Clara didn't have to ask. Her grandmother folded the paper and slid it across the table. The front page read, "Flight Ethics Revolution. FAA confirms emergency meeting with teen who triggered national audit." Charlotte tapped the rim of her mug. "Looks like they want to talk." Clara nodded. "I figured. They're asking you to testify." It wasn't a courtroom. Not yet. But walking into the hearing chamber in D.C. felt like stepping into a storm in slow motion. Clara wore navy slacks and a soft gray cardigan, her mother's. No makeup, no hair done by some PR team, just herself. And a manila folder held tight in both hands. Reporters leaned across velvet ropes. She's the one. Looks just like her mother. I thought she was older. She's a kid. Charlotte walked behind her, silent. Not guiding, not shielding. Just there. Inside the chamber, rows of senators, FAA officials, and aviation lobbyists waited behind microphones. Senator Martin, chair of the Aviation Ethics Subcommittee, welcomed her with a firm nod. Miss Bennett, we thank you for being here. Please, whenever you're ready. Clara didn't sit yet. She opened the folder and pulled out a page. Handwritten, a diagram, her own drawing of the flight cabin with a red X marked 1A. Then she looked up. I didn't come here to talk about a seat, she said. This was never about a seat. It's about a system that doesn't ask who you are, just what you look like. Murmurs rippled through the room. She continued, voice steady. I was kicked out because someone assumed I didn't belong. But what you need to understand is, there are thousands of kids like me, who won't ever be in first class, who won't ever have a fail-safe code to press, and they're the ones this is really about. Senator Martin leaned forward. Clara, are you saying the system itself encourages profiling? Clara didn't flinch. I'm saying your system isn't broken. It was built this way. That silence again. Heavy. Real. She handed over the second page. A printout of booking algorithm test results, run by Charlotte's team, showing bias linked to names, zip codes, and ticket upgrades. Then a third page. A proposal, not from Skynova. From Clara. The Passenger Protection Protocol, PPP. Anonymous reporting for cabin discrimination, mandatory crew ethics certification, emergency access for all passengers to flag behavior, quarterly transparency reports from all major airlines youth advisory board with voting rights, age 13 to 18. Senator Martin blinked. You drafted a full policy framework? Clara just nodded. Charlotte watched from the gallery, her hands folded, expression unreadable. But inside, she was shaking. Not because Clara was strong, but because she wasn't alone. By noon, Clara was already being called the ethics architect. By 6 p.m., the hearing replay had over 2.3 million views. But by midnight, that's when the first call came from Geneva. The International Civil Aviation Ethics Board was requesting a live Zoom with Clara and Charlotte, proposing the PPP as a new global standard. It's happening, Charlotte whispered. It's not enough, Clara whispered back, because she hadn't forgotten Rhonda, or the quiet pain of being shoved, doubted, ignored by someone paid to serve. 2 days later, Clara stood in front of a packed audience at the National Transportation Forum in Atlanta, not as a victim, but as the opening keynote speaker. She walked on stage to polite applause, but it grew louder as they saw she carried no notes. She looked into the audience. Airline CEOs, policymakers, advocates, and teen groups flown in from every state. And then she said, You think I came here to tell you what not to do, but I didn't. I came here to tell you what we're going to build next. Silence. Then she pulled up a slide. Clara's rule. No. One should need power to be treated like a person. The room erupted, and the story of Clara Bennett stopped being a headline and became a movement. Clara's inbox was on fire. Her school counselor emailed her, her science teacher, a girl she hadn't spoken to since 5th grade. Even the owner of her favorite boba tea shop sent a voice note that just said, Girl, you did that. By the end of the week, her speech had been translated into 6 languages. BBC called her the Quiet Force. The Washington Post, a teen who reprogrammed the skies. But Clara, she was still brushing her teeth the same way, still doing dishes, still feeding her neighbor's grumpy cat when they were out of town. Fame didn't change her, but power attracted enemies. It started with a leaked memo. Clara wasn't supposed to see it. But when a junior staffer from the FAA forwarded her a thread accidentally, Charlotte knew it wasn't an accident. The subject line read, "Containment Strategy, Phase 1. Soft delegitimize the Bennett Plan." Inside were bullet points. Highlight her age. Imply overreach by teen activists. Use parent group concerns. Pilot training disruption. Push narrative. Good story, bad policy. Clara scrolled through it, her hand still sticky from an orange she'd peeled 5 minutes earlier. She looked up. Are they serious? Charlotte looked over her glasses. Oh, honey, they're terrified. Meanwhile, TV segments had started shifting tone. One popular anchor, smiling just a little too tight, said, "A well-intentioned child should not be drafting federal protocol. That's a job for seasoned adults." Another segment on a business network ran a panel of experts, 4 white men in suits, discussing whether youth-led trauma was a reliable basis for regulation. Clara watched it in silence, then muted the TV, then turned to Charlotte. "We need a plan." She wasn't wrong. Behind closed doors, 3 airline coalitions, quietly fuming after being forced to sign the Clara Bennett Passenger Ethics Accord, began crafting their counterplay. They couldn't touch her directly. That would backfire. But they could slow the rollout, choke the funding, flood media with doubt, and above all, they could buy time, until Clara moved on. She was 15. She'd grow out of it. Right? Wrong. On Tuesday, Clara received a letter, hand-delivered. Thick envelope, gold seal. It wasn't from a school or a government agency. It was from Alonso Vega, the elusive ethics architect behind Skytrack, the real-time aviation compliance network used by 42 federal airports. Clara had never met him. He was a mystery, even to Charlotte. The letter read, "Dear Miss Bennett, you and I have never met, but I've followed your every word since Chapter 1 began. The game they're playing isn't new, but you're not just playing. You're rewriting the rules. If you ever need access, real access, use the enclosed code, AV." Inside was a single black card. No numbers, no name. Just a small silver key symbol in the center. Clara stared at it. "What does this mean?" she asked. Charlotte exhaled. "It means someone just passed you the spare keys to the system." That night, Clara activated the code through Charlotte's secure terminal. A new interface appeared. Skytrack Core, a live dashboard of compliance scores, ethics breaches, passenger complaints, and real-time algorithms for 42 airports. She clicked on the data stream for Sky Nova. A red alert flashed. 42 active complaints flagged. All 3 escalated by crew manipulation of passenger profiles. She leaned forward. "These aren't random." Charlotte joined her. "They're rerouting ethics pings, trying to make the system think it's functioning." It was a workaround, a cheat, and someone high up was behind it. The next day, Clara published a quiet update. No press, no drama. Just a soft message on the Skytrack Ethics Journal. When systems start hiding themselves, that's when we need transparency the most. We're watching, CB. That was all. But within 12 hours, 3 regional airports initiated internal ethics audits. By morning, the New York Times ran the headline, "Teen Whistleblower Exposes Manipulated Ethics Data in Airline Compliance System." By nightfall, Sky Nova stock had dropped 4%. The counterstrike had failed, but the war wasn't over. That same evening, a man in a tailored gray suit stood at a downtown DC bar. He scrolled through Clara's quote, then called someone on a secure line. "She's not going away," he muttered. "If anything, she's evolving." The voice on the other end said, "Then we pivot. Shift the focus. Make her story about something else. Maybe even turn her into a liability." "How?" There was a pause. Then, "Find her father." Back in Berkeley, Clara sat quietly under her blanket, laptop open, notifications buzzing every 2 seconds. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't scared. She was calculating, because she knew the moment applause starts fading, the real work begins. Clara had always known. There were questions she never asked, holes in stories she never poked at, photos half-burned in drawers she never opened. But now the world wanted answers she didn't even want for herself, and they were digging hard. On the second Thursday after the ethics memo leak, Clara and Charlotte returned home from a late-night policy roundtable. The moment they stepped into the living room, Charlotte's phone buzzed. Once, twice, then 9 times in a row. She didn't answer, just tapped into the live news. A split-screen broadcast flickered on the TV. On the left was Clara's speech at the National Transportation Forum. On the right, a man in a faded military photo. Beneath the images, breaking. Sources say Skytrack teen's father tied to federal investigation. Clara's chest tightened. She didn't need to ask who the man was. She had his eyes. The next morning, media vans parked along their cul-de-sac. Reporters camped outside, holding photos, waving microphones. "Clara, is it true? Was your father part of a tech fraud investigation? Did you build Skytrack with stolen code?" The lies came fast, stitched into half-truths and spliced into segments. And worse, some stuck. By noon, Clara's school suspended her for her safety. By 2 p.m., Skytrack's ethics board called an emergency meeting. By 4:17 p.m., a trending hashtag read, #Clara coded from crime. Charlotte paced the kitchen. "This isn't an attack on you," she said. "It's an attack on your credibility. They're scared." Clara just stared out the window. "They're not wrong," she whispered. "I don't know anything about him." She didn't say his name, not once, but Charlotte finally did. "James," she said. "Your father's name was James Hollister." Clara blinked. "Was?" Charlotte nodded. "He died when you were 6. I never told you because I didn't think you needed to carry his shadow. He wasn't a criminal, but he wasn't clean either." Clara didn't cry. She didn't even move. She just asked, "Did he love me?" Charlotte hesitated. Then, "He did, but not the way you deserved." By evening, Clara was trending in 3 countries, for all the wrong reasons. Conservative news outlets ran segments titled "Sky Queen" or "Sky Scam." Anonymous accounts posted supposed leaked code fragments. One journalist claimed she'd plagiarized a 2011 ethics framework authored by, ironically, James Hollister himself. Every headline framed Clara not as a visionary, but as her father's ghost. Inside, Clara sat in silence, scrolling the comments under her ethics speech video. Once filled with praise, they were now littered with doubt. She's just a front. She's playing the sympathy card. Another privileged girl playing savior. She closed the laptop, then reached under her bed and pulled out the one thing Charlotte had never touched, a rusted metal box with a broken lock. Inside, a photo, a postcard, and one flash drive. She'd found it years ago, behind the old furnace. Never opened it. Now she plugged it in. The screen loaded slowly. Inside were 3 files. A letter titled, "For Clara, when she's ready." A blueprint file. Protoethics.avi. A signed document. Joint IP proposal. Hollister/Bennett. Clara opened the letter. Her father's words were messy, typed but raw. "You're probably angry, or confused, or both. I don't know who you'll grow up to be, but if you're anything like your mother, you'll have fire. And if you're reading this, you're carrying the fight we started. Don't let the system twist it, or you." Clara blinked away the sting in her eyes. "We tried to build something real, your mom and I. They killed it before it launched. I took the fall. She took you. That was our deal." The blueprint was a primitive version of Skytrack, rough, incomplete, but unmistakably the same foundation. Clara closed the file, then turned to Charlotte. "You built it with him." Charlotte didn't deny it. "Yes, we called it proto-ethics, but after the crash in 2010, when the project was silenced, he took the heat. I walked away. You were just a baby. I chose to protect you." Clara didn't respond. She didn't need to. She stood up, grabbed her laptop, and started typing. The post went live 2 hours later. No PR, no headline, just code. "Transparency isn't clean, but it's mine. Here's the original protocol. Judge for yourself." She uploaded all 3 files, left nothing out, and at the bottom signed her name, not just as Clara Bennett, but as Clara Bennett Hollister, daughter of 2 broken builders, and not ashamed. The internet exploded. Half praised her bravery, half dug deeper into the dirt. But for the first time in 3 days, the noise wasn't spinning the story. It was hers again. 3 days later, the FAA reinstated the Passenger Ethics Index rollout, reaffirming its foundation as originated by the Bennett-Hollister model. The Washington Ethics Consortium named Clara the 2025 Youth Architect of Systems Change. But more importantly, one senator called Charlotte personally. "We'd like to nominate Clara to co-chair the new Civilian Ethics Oversight Council." Charlotte paused. "She's still 50. The senator replied. "Yes, but the world she's building doesn't care how old she is, only how honest." The air in the Capitol Hill conference room was icy, not because of the AC, though it was blasting, but because Clara could feel it. The stares, the side glances, the hush that fell whenever she walked in. The title on her nameplate read, "Clara Bennett Hollister, Civilian Co-Chair, Aviation Ethics Oversight Council." But respect. That didn't come printed, especially not from 6 men twice her age, each with resumes longer than the runway at LAX. They didn't hate her, at least not publicly. They commended her bravery. They valued her perspective. They even clapped politely when she first spoke. But every time Clara brought up enforcement, real-time score publishing, mandatory ethics API transparency, someone always pushed back. Let's revisit that next quarter. Or worse, we appreciate your input, but the complexity of federal procurement might be outside your current scope of experience. Charlotte whispered once. "That's Washington speak for sit down, little girl." But Clara didn't sit. She didn't flinch. She studied every protocol, every vendor contract, every ethics scoring loophole buried in page 47 of 84. And that's when she found it. A clause, hidden in the vendor agreement of SkyNova Airlines, one of the 3 holdouts still resisting full passenger ethics compliance. It read, "Ethics score modifiers may be proposed for review quarterly, contingent on internal variance reviews conducted via in-house compliance tools." Translation? They were grading themselves and using it to cheat the federal system. Clara didn't go to the press. She went to the council, calmly, professionally, presented her data, laid it out in a 6-minute PowerPoint. The room went quiet. Then Councilman Trent from Illinois cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, while your passion is admirable, I question the legality of how this data was acquired." Clara didn't blink. "It's from a federal-facing ethics dashboard. I have level 3 authorization." Councilwoman Levine chimed in. "But if we make this public, we risk destabilizing all 3 of our largest airline partners." Clara didn't raise her voice. She just said, "Passengers are already destabilized. They're duct taped, disrespected, denied. What you're protecting isn't stability, it's revenue." And with that, she called for a vote. Only 3 members raised their hands. 4 abstained. The motion failed. The room moved on. But Clara didn't. That night, she didn't go home. She and Charlotte went to the Federal Data Access Center, a beige, windowless building that looked more like a DMV than the place where aviation networks were monitored. Inside, She requested a compliance status check on Skynova's last 60 days of activity. It took 4 hours. When it finished, the system returned 17 alerts, deliberate signal deferrals, unreported gate incidents, and one major breach. A VIP passenger who was racially profiled, removed from a seat, and falsely flagged as non-cooperative. Clara knew the name. It was a 13-year-old girl, Maya Fletcher. The case had been buried. And that changed everything. The next morning, Clara filed an Emergency Ethics Acceleration Memo, EEAM, a new override protocol she'd authored herself, backed by the FAA charter. It required just 3 signatures to trigger. She had her own. Charlotte's, who had been appointed Technical Systems Advisor, and a surprise third, Alonzo Vega. He showed up quietly. No announcement, just a nod. "Time to clear the air," he said. At 9:42 a.m., the Skytrack core dashboard went red. 3 airports received the following alert. Skynova Airlines temporarily suspended from passenger ethics network. Non-compliance level, critical. Flights paused. Boardings halted. Within 12 minutes, a chain reaction followed. 147 mm in contracts frozen, 3 Skynova executives placed on leave. Senate subcommittee issued emergency subpoenas. And Clara, she sat quietly in the back corner of the Capitol press room. Not at the podium, not on a throne. Just observing, watching the dominoes fall. At 1:17 p.m., Skynova CEO Lisa Penderson held a press conference. Visibly sweating, she read, "Due to unforeseen compliance discrepancy, Skynova is working closely with federal partners to restore full operational transparency. We acknowledge the breakdown and thank Ms. Bennett Hollister for her diligence." The apology was long, but the sentence Clara noticed most? "We acknowledge," not "we deny," not "we regret," but "we acknowledge." And in D.C., that was the equivalent of blood on the floor. Later that night, Clara received a call from Councilwoman Levine. She didn't say much, just this: "You've made your point. The next vote will be public." Clara hung up, leaned back on the couch, and finally exhaled. Charlotte handed her a hot cup of cocoa. "You all right?" Clara smiled faintly. "No, but I'm not here to feel all right. I'm here to make it right." Clara didn't say a word when the gates shut down. She didn't need to. At exactly 6:42 a.m., the first domino fell. 3 major airports, Seattle-Tacoma, Denver International, and Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta, received a silent ping through the Skyscan Ethics Compliance System. The alert was non-negotiable. Ethics Compliance Breach Level 5. Initiate Gate Lock Protocol. Within 90 seconds, all Skynova flights scheduled to depart were denied gate clearance. No alarm, no flashing headlines, just a digital freeze. By the time airport staff started making confused calls, Clara Bennett was already sitting on the edge of her bed in Berkeley, eyes fixed on her screen, watching the ripple unfold across the country. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, not trembling, not panicking. She was focused, calm, like her mother used to be. Across from her, Grandma Charlotte clutched a warm mug of ginger tea. "It's done, isn't it?" Clara nodded. "They're locked out. What happens now?" "We wait for them to come to us." By 8:15 a.m., corporate Slack channels at Skynova looked like war rooms. Department heads fired messages back and forth. "Why are we being denied access at C and ATL? Who triggered gate lock? FAA? Is this tied to that girl's access code? We need Weiss on this, now." Meanwhile, the Skyscan Index, Clara's late mother's crowning creation, showed 3 big red bars. The score for Skynova's ethics compliance had dropped below 42%, triggering the fail-safe protocol. A line of code written years ago had now effectively shut down part of America's air infrastructure. This wasn't a hack. It was accountability by design. And Clara, age 15, held the key. By noon, the press caught wind. The phrase, "passenger ethics accord," started trending across social media. Journalists scrambled for background. Most were stunned to find that the entire meltdown could be traced back to a silent ethics trigger, initiated not by a federal agency, but by a teenage girl with verified oversight access. Is this about the incident in first class last week? Sources say she's the daughter of the late Helena Bennett, the air gate lock architect. Did this girl just freeze $500 million in logistics? As the press frothed, Clara got a call. Blocked number. She answered anyway. "This is Clara." "Miss Bennett, this is Director Langston from the FAA. We'd like to discuss a possible closed session review panel. Immediately." She paused. "I'll bring my documentation." 2 hours later, Clara and Grandma Charlotte sat in a secure briefing room in downtown San Francisco. Across the table sat 6 officials from the FAA, TSA, and the Department of Transportation. Most were stone-faced. One of them, Langston, opened with what almost sounded like admiration. "You realize what you just did paralyzed over 72 Skynova flights and froze logistics at 3 major hubs?" Clara nodded. "You realize that's a national security level disruption?" She raised an eyebrow. "So is duct taping a kid to his seat. So is kicking passengers out of first class for being the wrong skin color. So is ignoring every internal complaint system for years." No one interrupted her. "I didn't build the system. My mom did. But she built it for this, for when no one else would listen." Langston leaned back. "Why now?" Clara's eyes sharpened. "Because it wasn't just my seat they tried to take. It was her dignity, and mine, and every other kid who's ever been told, 'You don't belong here.'" The room was silent. Then the youngest official on the panel, a woman in her early 30s, broke the stillness. "She's not wrong." That night, the story broke on CNN. Teenage ethics architect freezes airline access after discrimination incident. It went viral in hours. Parents reposted it. Veterans reposted it. Flight crew whistleblowers shared it with captions like, "She did what we've been too scared to do." At 2 a.m., Skynova's CEO released a written statement. "While we do not condone what occurred on Flight 378, we believe the response has been disproportionate and dangerous. We are initiating internal investigations." But it was too late. The FAA held an emergency press briefing at 10 a.m. the next morning. They confirmed that the Clara Bennett protocol would now be part of a national review process for airlines seeking federal contracts. Any carrier scoring below 55% on the Passenger Ethics Index would be subject to automatic review and potential gate denial. Skynova stock dropped 8.2% by market close. But for Clara, the victory wasn't loud. It was quiet. She didn't post a celebratory video, didn't give a TikTok explanation. She just sat in her living room, rereading the final review logs from the suspended flights. Grandma Charlotte watched her from the hallway. "You okay, baby?" Clara didn't look up. "Yeah. What's next?" She closed the laptop. "I think I need to start building Protocol 2.0. Charlotte chuckled. "Already planning the sequel?" Clara smiled. "This isn't over. They'll try to spin it, dilute it, make it look like a tech glitch or teenage rebellion." Charlotte nodded. "So, what do you do?" Clara stood up. "I make it undeniable." Elsewhere, at Skynova headquarters, chaos ruled. Jonathan Weiss, their head of legal, was on a conference call with international partners, trying to delay audits. PR teams scrambled to counter the narrative, but it was too late. 3 global booking platforms, Skybook, Aeronet, and Wings Go, announced they would flag Skynova as ethics non-compliant until further notice. Even worse, 2 of them were already piloting the Skyscan system voluntarily. They had no intention of removing it, because the truth was clear: the system worked. And it had just proven that one teenager with authority and integrity could bring an entire unethical airline to its knees, without screaming, without threatening, without even raising her voice. Just a failsafe. And a girl brave enough to press it. The backlash hit faster than Clara expected. It started with one news headline: 15-year-old freezes airline over seat dispute, overreach or justice. Then came the talking heads, cable networks, podcasts, comment threads flooded with, "Is she really a hero? Where were her parents? Why does a child have the power to shut down flights?" Clara watched from the living room couch, face blank. Her fingers clenched the throw pillow beside her as if it could absorb the noise. She wasn't afraid. She was tired. At Sky Nova's headquarters, the backlash was orchestrated. Their media team had gone into overdrive, hiring PR consultants to shape a new story. Clara was emotionally compromised. The gate lock was a reckless misuse of federal authority. Her mother's system was never intended to be in the hands of a minor. They pushed interviews with experts who questioned juvenile influence over aviation policy and quietly encouraged trolls to flood her socials with targeted harassment. It worked for about a day. Then something unexpected happened. A group of flight attendants, still anonymous, leaked a letter. It read, "We've watched Sky Nova ignore passenger abuse complaints for years." Clara didn't break the system. She proved it finally works. It went viral in 6 hours. By that night, Sky Nova's ethical score dipped below 40%, automatically revoking its pre-clearance access to 6 international airports. And that was just the beginning. Back home, Clara didn't gloat. She didn't post a victory thread. She logged off. Grandma Charlotte noticed. "Too much?" Clara nodded. "They're not just attacking me. They're trying to erase her. My mom. Everything she stood for." Charlotte sat beside her. "Then make it louder. Don't defend. Lead." The next morning, Clara did just that. She posted a single line on skyethica.org, the platform she'd quietly co-developed with 3 other ethics coders. "We're launching Passenger Ethics Charter 2.0. Either airlines protect passengers, especially vulnerable ones, or they lose access. Period." Attached was a white paper. It included a tiered accountability system, a verified score for real-time booking, flagging tools for minor and disabled passengers, a minimum ethics score requirement for FAA contracts. 24 hours later, 19 airlines signed. Sky Nova wasn't one of them. But Clara wasn't waiting. She had another announcement to make, this time from Geneva. Standing on stage at the Global Passenger Rights Conference, she spoke in front of ministers, airline executives, and advocacy groups. The skies don't belong to CEOs or gate agents with power trips. They belong to all of us, and no child should ever be told, "You don't belong here." Not in 2025, not ever again. The room rose in applause. A woman from the Dutch Aviation Board whispered to a colleague, "She's not a girl anymore. She's a force." At the same time, Clara's impact triggered industry shifts. FAA confirmed it would adopt Charter 2.0 into its 2026 compliance framework. 3 booking platforms required ethics scores to appear beside airline names. International airports began installing Clara terminals, kiosks where passengers could report unethical behavior in real time. Meanwhile, Sky Nova continued hemorrhaging support. Executives argued behind closed doors about whether to negotiate with the child, but the public wasn't having it. A trending tweet said it best. "She's 15, and she grounded you with a click. Maybe don't call her a child." At home, Clara stood by the bay window. She didn't feel like a hero, or a hacker, or a headline. She felt responsible. Her mom had always said, "Fix what you can, then teach others to fix what you can't." Now, she was doing both. Charlotte walked over, holding 2 mugs. "Hot cocoa," she said, "for generals who win wars." Clara smiled, took a sip, then looked at the night sky. "I'm not done yet." 72 hours after Clara's Geneva speech, the emails started flooding in. Subject lines like, "Compliance request, Tokyo Aviation Authority. Urgent, Charter 2.0 Adaptation Inquiry. FAA, Meeting Invitation, Passenger Ethics Council." The room where Clara sat wasn't a war room. It was her grandmother's spare study, lined with old cookbooks and faded photos. Yet the air carried the weight of global infrastructure shifting. That morning, the FAA's Executive Council called an emergency press briefing. Their spokesperson, a steely woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense bun, stepped to the podium. After consultation with Skyscan authorities and the Bennett Foundation, we are adopting Passenger Ethics Charter 2.0 as a mandatory compliance protocol for all U.S. licensed carriers, effective immediately. A murmur spread through the room. She continued, Charter 2.0 will be embedded in FAA licensing renewals, and ethics scores must remain above the federal threshold of 75% to retain route permissions. The shift was seismic. For the first time, a 15-year-old's ethical framework was shaping national aviation law. Back in Geneva, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, wasn't far behind. At a closed-door meeting, Clara sat across from aviation delegates from 21 countries. A British rep, leaning forward, said, Clara, we've never seen this level of passenger advocacy gain traction so quickly. Why now? Clara didn't flinch. Because people are done watching others get humiliated in silence. Because justice is no longer about lawsuits, it's about systems. And because a child doesn't need your permission to demand decency. Silence. Then, a quiet, unanimous nod. By end of day, 17 countries signed preliminary approval of Charter 2.0. Meanwhile, Skynova's boardroom was chaos. The internal ethics dashboard had turned blood red. Ethics score, 31% booking partnerships, 3 suspended airport contracts, 5 revoked. CEO Rick Dalton slammed his fist on the table. This is out of control. A teenager is rewriting our operational DNA. His PR chief muttered. The teenager is just enforcing what her mother designed. We're the ones ignoring the system. Another exec leaned forward. We have 2 choices. Sign the charter or bleed out slowly in public. But Rick wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Outside the corporate world, the impact was visceral. At LAX, a group of disabled veterans cheered as new accessibility check-in modules were installed. Direct results of Clara's ADA clause in Charter 2.0. In Atlanta, a flight attendant testified anonymously to a watchdog panel. I've seen my coworkers mock accents, ignore elderly passengers, and get away with it. Since Charter 2.0, 3 people on my line got flagged. They should have been years ago. In London, a single mom in a wheelchair posted a selfie with the caption, "First time I've ever boarded a plane without crying. Thank you, Clara." At home, Clara didn't bask in glory. She worked. For every headline, she double-checked back-end protocols. For every tweet praising her, she quietly emailed legal aid contacts to help other passengers file reports. Charlotte noticed the toll. "You're still a child," she said gently. Clara looked up, bags under her eyes. "That's the problem. If I don't act, no one takes us seriously. If I do, they say I'm too young." Charlotte sat beside her and handed her a worn notebook. "Then stop proving them wrong. Start leading like they can't catch up." The next turning point came a week later. The Federal Senate Aviation Subcommittee summoned Clara for a hearing titled Passenger Dignity and Modern Aviation, the Bennett Reform Framework. She walked into the chamber wearing the same blazer as Geneva. Simple, confident. Senators asked tough questions. One said, "Miss Bennett, what qualifies you to dictate federal compliance protocols?" She replied calmly, "I don't dictate anything. I just made sure no one else can be silenced without accountability. Your systems allowed abuse to go unseen. I made it visible." The room was silent. Then Senator Martinez from Arizona leaned into the mic. "Miss Bennett, if my granddaughter ever flies alone, I hope the airline she boards remembers your name." By the end of that week, 4 massive shifts occurred. FAA passed the Bennett Compliance Act, permanently integrating Charter 2.0. 3 major U.S. airlines announced ethics officers on board each flight, a role created based on Clara's proposal. The Bennett score was displayed on all U.S. airline booking platforms, right beside flight prices. Skynova's CEO Rick Dalton resigned under pressure, issuing a statement that read, "We failed to recognize the ethical tide, and it cost us our future." In response, Clara didn't throw a press conference. She sent one tweet: "Passengers aren't cargo, they're humans, and now the skies reflect that." Her story reached more than the aviation world. A tech startup asked her to co-lead their ethical AI project. A European rail union wanted her guidance. Even public schools began teaching her story as part of civics classes under the unit Modern Youth Leadership. One comment stood out online. She didn't just fix one flight. She rewired the whole runway. On a rainy Sunday evening, Clara stood by the window. Charlotte joined her, holding a small framed photo. It was Helena Bennett, arms folded, smiling beside an old plane prototype. "She'd be proud," Charlotte whispered. Clara didn't respond right away. Then she smiled faintly. "She'd probably tell me to rest, and then double-check the algorithm." They laughed. As dusk fell, news anchors recapped the week with headlines like, "Teenager rewrites federal aviation ethics." Charter 2.0 now standard across 42 nations. From passenger to pioneer, Clara Bennett's flight to change. But for Clara, it wasn't over. This wasn't a victory lap. It was only the first landing of many. Clara slipped onto the jet bridge, boarding pass in hand, and stepped into the first-class cabin of Flight 892 bound for New York. The familiar hum of overhead bins and soft chatter felt different today, lighter, almost hopeful. She sank into seat 1A, the leather cool beneath her. The latch of the overhead bin clicked shut, and the soft glow of the reading light illuminated her notebook resting on the tray. She took a breath, exhaling slowly. 16 months ago, she'd been escorted to row 34, humiliated, isolated, stripped of dignity. Now, she was a quiet force, seated among people who greeted her with genuine respect. A flight attendant paused mid-aisle, offering a gentle nod. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Bennett," he said, before continuing his duties. Clara's lips curved in a small smile. The engines rumbled to life, and as the plane lifted off, she gazed out the window at the shrinking city below. Behind her, a teenage girl in the seat 1B tentatively tapped her tablet. Clara recognized the shy look, the same look she'd worn months ago before her work drew global attention. Catching Clara's eye, the girl offered a brief wave. Clara returned it with a warm nod. Clara opened her notebook and flipped to a clean page marked Protocol 3.20. She jotted down a few bullet points. Expanding real-time ethics scoring to intercity trains, integrating passenger feedback into airport design, launching a multilingual ethics helpline. Her pen paused as she reconsidered the order. Even a small tweak could prevent confusion down the line. She wrote again. Structure first, user interface next, data transparency always. The flight attendant returned with a glass of water, placing it gently on her tray. Clara nodded her thanks. No rush. She watched the cabin, the elderly woman next to her offering a sympathetic smile, the parents in row 1C gently quieting a restless toddler. None of them knew the full story, but they felt the change. The airlines they flew had freshly trained crews, new wheelchair access kiosks, and a culture of accountability. Clara's work had made those ripples. Just before they reached cruising altitude, the flight attendant announced, "If anyone needs assistance, anything at all, please press your call button. We're here to help." It felt like more than a routine line. It was a promise. On the in-flight screen, a small icon in the corner displayed the airline's ethics rating, 96%, up from a dismal 31% just months ago. Clara's heart swelled with pride. She remembered the early days when that red number haunted every dashboard, a glaring reminder of unspoken injustices. Now, it was green, almost flawless. She closed her eyes, quietly reflecting. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "You built something better, She remembered the first time she sat in a council hearing, powerless to convince seasoned officials. She remembered the backlash, pundits claiming a child had overstepped. She remembered typing the Charter 2.0 white paper, knowing it might cost her privacy and safety. And it had. But here she was, not celebrated as a trophy, but recognized as a changemaker. Clara's phone buzzed. A message from Geneva. Congratulations. Charter 3.0 module approved for pilot testing in 4 more countries. She glanced at the clock. 10:15 a.m. Pacific. The date would mark a year since the original Geneva vote. A full circle. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Clara slipped her notebook into her backpack. In the row behind, a retired teacher leaned forward. Miss Bennett, just wanted to say thank you. Her voice trembled slightly. Last year, my granddaughter was treated poorly. No one believed her. Now her fear has a voice. Clara's throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered. I'm glad it helped. The teacher nodded. You've given hope to so many. Clara gave a small nod, then returned to her window seat, heart steady. As the descent began, the captain announced, We'll be landing shortly. Thank you for flying with us today. Clara watched the suburban landscape roll out below. Rows of houses, winding highways, small parks dotted with children at play. She thought of those children, teenagers and younger, who might one day fly alone. She thought of adults still fighting for basic respect. She thought of her grandmother, quietly cheering her on from Berkeley. And she thought of her mother, whose vision had ignited all of this. The wheels touched down smoothly. In the aisle, passengers stirred to collect belongings. Clara stood, shouldered her backpack, and walked down the aisle. The flight attendant gave another nod. Hope to see you again soon, Ms. Bennett. She continued toward the exit and into the terminal. Digital boards showed flight statuses alongside small ethics icons, green, yellow, red, reminding everyone that accountability wasn't optional. She exited into the warm, filtered sunlight of the arrival hall, pausing to admire the passenger ethics portal display near baggage claim. An interactive kiosk where travelers could learn about their rights, rate their experience, and find resources. Clara paused there, reading a quote displayed on the screen. The skies belong to all who dare to dream of flight. She spun around, spotting a mother helping her toddler reach a button on the kiosk. The mother smiled at Clara and mouthed, "Thank you." Clara returned the gesture, warmth flooding her chest. Moments later, Grandma Charlotte appeared, waving from the curb outside. Clara moved toward her, crossing paths with a family who paused, pointed, and mouthed, "Thank you, Miss Bennett." Clara felt a soft glow. No pity, no condescension, just genuine respect. Charlotte helped Clara load her luggage into the car. As they drove away, the airport receded into the distance. Clara looked out the window at the highway ahead. Somewhere else, another flight prepared to take off. Another set of passengers would board, needing a system that cared. Back home, as dusk settled over Berkeley, Clara settled at her desk. The Protocol 3.0 outline was open, the first few lines already filled in. She paused, pen poised. She remembered the adolescent who had once been shoved from her seat, the frightened look in her own reflection as she walked row 34, the moment she tapped the fail-safe. And now, she was that adolescent's hope returned, amplified to thousands. She tapped her pen to paper and wrote, "Commitment. Protect the dignity of every traveler, everywhere. Begin with kindness. Build with transparency." She closed her notebook, satisfied for the moment. The moonlight filtered through the window, painting her workspace in soft silver. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, tweaks to the scoring algorithm, outreach to underrepresented communities, collaboration with disability advocacy groups. But tonight, the world seemed just a little more gentle, a little more fair. Clara switched off her lamp and climbed into bed. As she drifted to sleep, she dreamed of endless blue skies, this time open to everyone. And that was all the closure she needed. How often do you fly? Whether you're a frequent traveler or only catch a plane a few times a year, tell us about any injustices you've seen in airports or on board. Even small incidents matter. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to learn from your experiences and build a better system together. If Clara's story inspired you, please like this video and share it so more passengers know their rights.